Looks like on X it's showing as live, so that's always a good signal.
Absolutely.
Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you joining us tonight. We're going to be starting here in just a few minutes with a very exciting guest. Western Exile joins Mad Talks tonight. We're going to be talking about his amazing adventures, primarily in Italy, and talk to him about his account and what he's doing now. So we'll begin momentarily. We would appreciate it if you would repost this video, let other people know that you're watching. The more the merrier. And we will be taking questions throughout, so please click on the live stream and leave your questions. It's at the bottom if you're on a PC. No, I'm sorry, I always get this backwards. I think it's at the right hand side if you're on a PC, and at the bottom if you're on your phone. So please leave your questions, and we'll have a great show tonight. So James, it's morning for you now. I believe 10 a.m.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
bushy-tailed.
That's good. Yeah, and I'm just getting ready to start winding down. It's 8 p.m. I'm in Ohio, so the Eastern time for the United States. So.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
Got a few more joining here. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you could join us this evening. We've got a great show tonight on Mad Talks. We are joined by Western Exile. Welcome, James. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm very excited to be having this discussion with you tonight. I'm very grateful and thankful for you joining us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not familiar with James and his account, Western Exile, this is a gentleman that I would love to spend multiple days with. I could talk for hours with this guy. He has such an interesting story. He's a historian. He's a traveler. He's a writer. And he's a great thinker on our world today and culture through history. So, Western Exile, James, again, thank you for joining us, sir.
The pleasure and honor are all mine.
Now, let me first ask you about your name, Western Exile. That's always kind of drawn me. Are you an exile, sir? Are you in trouble of some sort, or could you explain your name?
Well, I'm not in trouble with the law.
Okay,
from
good.
that point of view, not as far as I'm aware of. But who knows? There could be a distant Italian bureaucratic trap which has got me somewhere, though. No, it's I mean, the name is chosen deliberately, and also the image, by the way. My profile picture is, there is something of a stereotype of the statue head profile picture on X, and as it often gives me great pleasure to point out, mine is not a marble statue. It is a stucco sculpture, and the photograph is one that I took myself in Sicily from an ex-oratory, and it is an angel. It is not a pagan statue. So that is a reminder for me personally. I was always very, very taken with that image. Now, might be a good idea to show people what we're actually talking about here. So I'll just open that image. You might be able to see the icon already. If you follow me on X, you'll doubtless know what I'm talking about. But here we are. Okay. Yep. So we just share that on the stage. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's my profile picture. So as I say, this is a 17th century stucco angel.
What? I'm failing in my duties here. There we go. Beautiful, beautiful.
There we go. Yeah, so this is a 17th century stucco sculpture of an angel made by one of the truly great artists of the Sicilian Baroque, Giacomo Serpotto, a name which is basically unknown in the Western world, but this man created some extraordinary beauty. And as I say, I was always taken by this because it's not actually in the oratory for which it was made. It was actually taken from an oratory which was destroyed after the Italian unification and was preserved from the ruins, essentially, or from the rubble of that oratory. And there is something wistful about the gaze of it, and also the setting, because the area where this is held is a very deprived part of Palermo, the capital of Sicily as well. So this really struck me, and I should point out that this happened because I was indeed living in exile, you might say, because my home was Rome. But during the pandemic, I was separated from my. During the pandemic, I was separated from my family for the best part of a year because my wife and my only son went to Australia early in the pandemic for what was supposed to be 2 weeks, and that turned into the most part of a year. So,
oh my goodness,
yeah. So I held the fort in Rome, and it came during the summer of 2020 that the tenancy on our flat came up and expired. And there was, at this point, there was no indication whatsoever that Australia, or when Australia would open its borders, if at all. So I had to do something. So I decided to put all of our stuff into storage, everything I couldn't carry into storage, and I moved to Sicily.
Wow.
And to live there until further notice, basically. So that is the kind of the bit of context to the image that we're seeing here. So it's not just a picture I randomly chose off the internet. But then, of course, at the end, in 2022, I moved to Australia to be here to raise my family. So the connotations of the name are literal and spiritual, I would say. Literal because I am indeed living in a form of exile from my homelands, but also because I feel exiled from my homelands for a plethora of reasons which my travels in Italy helped me to understand. So, I mean, Sicily indeed was very much the last chapter of what was, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest adventure of my life, which was 2.5 years that I dedicated to exploring and documenting Italy's 20 regions.
Wow. I can't imagine the stories that you have. That's incredible. And you're going to share pictures with us this evening, and we're going to hear all about it. So stay tuned. It's going to be awesome. Well, let me ask you a little bit. So obviously you've got your X account. You're active on X. On Thursday, I guess it'd be Thursday evenings for you. Late evening. Thursday mornings for me. It's 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You stream with Evan Amato for your Invictus company. I don't know what you would call it. And you have a fantastic stream every week. Always something very interesting from history, spanning all cultures, all times. And if you haven't tuned in, you're really missing out. So please, everybody, check that out. Thursday mornings, dependent on where you are. But yeah, could you tell us a little bit about your collaboration with Evan Amato and Invictus?
Absolutely, yeah. So, well, I mean, X has been a remarkable medium for meeting some wonderful people, including yourself. Evan is another such example. So that one started rather fabulously through the medium of Italy once more, because I think it was probably about a year ago now that well, maybe it was a bit more. There was a rather glorious moment in the history of X, which for those in the know was on the 20th of September, I think it was 2023. The British ambassador to Italy posted a piece on X saying "Happy Liberation Day to Rome." And anyone who is familiar with the true story of Italian unification will know that liberation is the exact opposite of what happened on the 20th of September 1870, when Italian nationalist troops stormed Rome to deprive the Papal States of its last territory. And there's another account that we mutually follow called Papal Zouave International, which is a fabulous account, who posted a meme saying, "Liberated from what?" And Evan and I both kind of leaped in to his defense as well, and eventually the ambassador actually deleted the tweet. So it was a whim. So I think we kind of possibly were aware of each other from that point on. But later on, there was a post somewhere else where I commented in reply, or I'd written something about how Italian unification was anything but a kind of liberation, if you will. And I think he said he saw that, and then we messaged, and I think he was looking for somebody who could talk, who would be happy to talk about it, Italy, because it's very much I would say this as well. It's quite astonishing how aesthetics and things like this are obviously hugely popular on X, talking about beautiful architecture, things like this. But there's surprisingly little Italy dedicated content. And so it's always fascinating to, interact with people who are actually familiar with the country rather than, have never been, have just seen a pretty photo.
Right.
Not there's anything wrong with that at all, but, it's just connecting with people who know the country for real.
Sure.
Evan lives in Italy. I lived in Italy for 10 years. So that's how that kicked off. We initially were doing Spaces on X, purely Spaces for several months. And then we decided, it would be great to have visual media. So we switched over to streaming like this. And that's how Invictus came about. So through Invictus, twice a week, we publish, 3 times a week, I beg your pardon, we publish articles about a topic which is usually connected to the date of the week. So the anniversary of something which happened in history, focused on the great men of history, people who have shaped the world we live in, basically. Which is also a rebuttal to the academia speak of today, which holds that great men never existed, despite this being obviously false. And I say that as someone who's been through the academic system myself. So, that is a great.
It's amazing that you came through and have such a good head on your shoulders. Such a great perspective. That's very interesting to me. I studied history in school, and I'm eager to hear about your education. But it was always just revisionist history to tell the story as everybody had the worst intentions. Everybody has had evil in their hearts all the time, and took advantage of everybody for profit. Everything's horrible, basically, that we call society today. But with Invictus, you mentioned about your articles that you write. So there's a free subscription and also a paid subscription. Is that right?
Exactly, yes. So we do 3 articles every week. The first article goes out to everyone who's subscribed, and the latter 2, which are more extended pieces, go out on Thursday and a Saturday for those who have taken the full subscription. And we also stream live on Thursday evenings my time.
Right. I love tuning in. It's so thorough, and you guys take questions from the audience. So it's a great interaction. I really enjoy that. But the articles are great as well. So folks, if you're not signed up for Invictus, please do so immediately following this show. Let me ask you a little bit about your history. What did you study in school? Where did you study? Kind of how did you get on this path of history? And actually, what is your path? Could you talk a little bit about that?
What is my path, indeed? Know thyself, as the oracle would say. Well, I wonder about this myself, where it actually started, and really, because my earliest memory of any kind of book, obviously when I was an infant, I would have heard other stuff, but the first book I consciously remember owning was a book of mythology, Greek, Roman, and Norse myths. Wonderful book, one of those beautiful books which they don't make anymore, which is beautifully hand illustrated with stories written well, such that an adult could enjoy reading them as well. And I guess my parents would read them to me initially, but I would also take it away and read it. So that primed me, I suppose, if you will. I was certainly always fascinated, the stories of gods and heroes and monsters. That was what I dreamed of in my childhood. But it became anchored to this world, I suppose, really when I started secondary school, and we had an extremely inspirational classics teacher Now, depressingly, fewer and fewer schools offer classical civilizations, Latin, Greek, this kind of thing at schools these days. Fortunately, mine did. You might say that my school was a kind of stereotypically English one. It was a grammar school. It was located in what used to be a stately home, a Georgian stately home with a landscape park behind it and a lake. All had uniforms, had schoolhouses, the full suite. But it was one day in year 6, and then suddenly after lunch enters this teacher who is quite cool. He's got a mustache, a jacket, and he sat on the table. There's a big deal. And he just said, "Right, guys, I'm doing an expedition to Tunisia next April.
Wow.
To look at the ruins." He was very confident in the show. He said, "If anyone wants to come, you know where to find me." And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. So I went to Tunisia, and this was in April 2001, when I was, I think I would have been 10 years old at that point, or 11. Fortunately, before 9/11.
Right.
And we spent a week in Tunisia in the Northern Sahara, exploring the Roman ruins of North Africa, which are extraordinary because of the arid conditions, the preservation.
Sure.
Well, that, and also the fact that they've been relatively untouched by events since the classical era, are generally much better preserved than they are in Europe. So we visited Carthage, for example. We visited the city of Thuga, places like this, but also early Islamic sites like Kairouan, the great holy sites of Islam as well. But also there are so many lost cities which are just in the desert. You're driving hours through the Sahara, the Grand Erg Oriental, as that part is called. And on the horizon, you've got this mirage of the desert, then suddenly will emerge this pediment and columns. And it's just a whole city, which if it was in Europe would be swarming with tourists, but there is nobody there. No barriers, no ticket office, nothing. It's just there in the desert.
Wow.
May have changed since then, but that was very much you very much felt like you're an explorer going to these places. And, I was hit with that realization. I was standing on the pediment of the temple of the Capitoline Triad. So Zeus, Minerva, Juno, desert in every single direction, as far as the eye could see, and thinking, this is the most inhospitable fringe of the Roman Empire. If we think about the limits of the empire, we often think of maybe Hadrian's Wall, Scotland, this kind of places. Right. But North Africa, if this is, looking around at these temples, these monuments, if this is what it's like at the furthest fringe, what was it like at the core, and what was it like at its height? So my first contact with Rome came actually from the furthest flung frontier, and actually through the eyes of its enemy, Carthage. I went to Carthage before I went to Rome. Carthage, which famously its lands were sown with salt after the Romans destroyed it. So, and that through my secondary school years, every 2 years there'd be another expedition like this. So I was obviously very fortunate. So Tunisia, then we went to Italy. That's when I finally went to Rome for the first time. Went to Greece, went to Sicily, and through that it became a calling. And then I went to university to study ancient history at the University of Birmingham. Which is when I entered the fray of academia, and nice. and quickly realized what was important to me and what I was up against.
That's great.
So it was I was very fortunate from many points of view, but I think it was a fairly unique perspective. To be able to approach it in that way. There was that adventure. It was always accompanied by adventure.
Yeah,
not just.
And
books.
what a great age to have that happen. You're 11, 10, 11. Adventure is still alive in your heart. That kind of explorer adventure, and to light that fire. I told you before we came on air how it was later in life that I took my first trip abroad, and it just awakened this wanderlust in my heart to see like there's so many great things in the world, just to sit by in your own little corner your whole existence. If you have the means, the blessing, the opportunity to get out and to see more of it. Wow, it really does change your perspective, and can be just such a blessing for understanding who we are today, where we came from, and also just our neighbors. You know what I mean? It's a great thing. Travel is, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
And when you say it was a great age as well, I mean, I was still at that age where we might call it impressionable, I'd say, but
Right.
it wasn't important that I was unfamiliar with the actual history.
Right.
It was
Right.
that I was able to experience the wonder. The wonder, that is what is so easily lost.
Yes.
And if I had just visited a fort on Hadrian's Wall, for example, it might have been quite a bit different. But it was the experience of going to not only another country but a completely alien culture. Because we were
Right.
staying in Tunisia, we were with jeeps, we were in the desert.
Oh yeah.
There was that whole aspect to it as well. And as I say, we were. If this was about 6 months before 9/11 happened, so it would be impossible to do that trip today for a school group. One thing we often joke about still is that I actually got lost in the Grand Bazaar of Monastir in northern Tunisia, because never happened these days, but you're allowed to go off in groups of 3 without a teacher supervising to go and buy stuff, and I actually got lost. So the teacher still has nightmares to this day of what could have happened.
I'm sure.
Could have ended up in a slave market in Libya, who knows? But
well, we're glad you did it. We're glad you're here with us tonight.
Yeah.
Let me read a comment here. Liberty Mom is tuned in. How you doing, Liberty Mom? Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, she
says, absolutely. She says, hello, gentlemen. Thank you for having this talk. It's nice to hear about James' fascinating background. And I absolutely agree, Liberty Mom. I've been dying to get to know this gentleman more, and so pleased we can do so this evening. So, well, that's great. So we've heard about your first travels, and it kind of got this seed planted in your heart for the love of Italy and Rome specifically. So at that point, you focused on Roman history when you were at university?
It was pretty broad. It was I specialized in Roman history, but I went to the University of Birmingham. One of the main reasons I went was because it was one of the few places in the UK you could study not just Greece and Rome. You could also study Persia, Assyria, and Sumeria and other Near Eastern civilizations. Because I wanted to know, because I'd seen Rome through the eyes of the other side. I wanted to see, it's not just about Greece and Rome. The Greeks, a lot of their identity is formed with Persia, but you can't understand unless you know what Persia was like. So that was really useful. And also part of the course was what they called a study tour, where you organized an expedition abroad, and you had a particular academic assignment, then you would come back and present it. So for that, I actually went to Greece for that, to study. What was I studying? Religious architecture. So I did an extraordinary tour from Athens, Delphi, through the Peloponnese as well, Boeotia. Extraordinary. Greece. Italy and Greece are so similar in our minds, but they're so radically different in so many ways. Italy is a heavily urbanized culture. Greece is very rural. But also different philosophies of architecture, this kind of thing. But still, so I although Italy is my thing, it was invaluable for me to spend time in the civilizations which surrounded it.
Yeah.
Which
give you the
inspired
broader
Rome.
perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you were in university, was Rome always kind of on your radar? Like, I'm going there after this. Was it you had kind of a roadmap that took you to Italy?
Not exactly, because it was always my fascination. My undergraduate dissertation was written on the subject of the cursus honorum, which was the basically, in layman's terms, was the career path of a Roman politician especially under the Republic. So how old you had to be to start a career, the age limits of the officers, how the officers were structured to reach the top. Because it's not like today where you could have no experience and then just stand for the presidency or whatever. In those days, you had to do a lot of things beforehand. And it was my thesis was on that and how this directly contributed to the collapse of the Republic. And it was while I was writing this thesis, dealing with the collapse of the Republic, that I realized halfway through, I don't actually believe any of this anymore, in the sense of there's the traditional academic point of view of the Republic's collapse being a tragedy. And I'm just thinking, by the end of it, it really wasn't. Why? This groupthink is unbelievable. I mean, when you look into how the corruption which existed under the Republic, how dysfunctional it was, the tyranny that existed as well within it, the casual authoritarianism, and I'm thinking there's a reason why it fell and a reason why nobody mourned it when it did. So that started to make me think, and this also, by the way, coincided with the Arab Spring. It was the same year that this broke out. And this is when I started to realize, I started to become quite aware of this in the context of the world. Uprisings in Libya, Tunisia had a revolution as well, and of course the disaster in Syria, the destruction of cultural heritage. All of this was happening while I was writing this as well. Thinking,
oh wow,
yeah, this is when I started to reassess my positions about the West as well. But at the end of it, I graduated really at the height of the economic crisis in Europe. Especially in the UK as well. And basically, everybody had to go to London. That was the thing. You have to go to London. You get a stressful job in the city, working in finance, working in recruitment, one of the bizarre industries that boomed in that period. And I'm thinking, why? Why should I do this? My heart just is anywhere but in this. So I thought, well, I could do that and succumb to the groupthink once again, or I could do what I actually want to do, which is what our elders constantly tell us you should do, but nobody ever listens to them. Likewise, I could stay in academia, but I don't actually believe in the system anymore. So I thought, well, I could grow to the age of 40, 45, grow a beard, then go to become the British school at Rome or something, or I could just go right now. So I had a good friend of mine from Yorkshire who knew somebody who worked in television in London, whose husband was from Italy. We met up, we had a dinner, and he was telling me, well, there's, in Italy, there's a boom industry for teachers, especially English teachers. There's never enough. So, okay, well, this could be a way in. So I packed a suitcase, had my laptop, had a booking for 10 nights in a hotel in Rome, and that's how I built my life in Italy from that. So
wow.
It all started with that. So that was 2012, although I prepared for that by I got a scholarship to study Italian in Florence, an intensive course of Italian study in Florence for a month.
That I was going to ask, if you spoke the language before you went. Okay, so that's helpful.
I'd been on family holidays to Italy, and I'd been
with
a teacher as well, but it was limited to per favore, un gelato per favore, this kind of stuff.
Right.
The essentials,
sure.
the bare essentials, respectful essentials is perhaps what I would put it. But yeah, that was an enlightening experience as well, because language is taught horrendously in the UK. I don't know what it is like in America, for example, but nobody sees the point of it. It's taught in a very, very dry academic style as well, which doesn't help. And I realized after 4 weeks in Florence, I had advanced in Italian more than I'd advanced in French or German in 10 years of education at school. So it was a full on immersion in the culture, because we had classes 9 till 1, and then you had the rest of the day in Florence. So you could immediately go on the street and put into practice what you were learning. So that was
that's fantastic,
beautiful period. Yeah.
Wow, man, I absolutely love my life. I'm a blessed man. I have a wonderful wife and children and job. I do not forsake any of that, but a part of me would love just to somehow be in a bubble and be able to be transported, for 6 months to someplace like that and just have that immersion experience. So maybe in retirement I'll get to do some of that, but that's incredible. Okay, so you've traveled to Rome now. You're there, and can you lay out for us, like, what does the next 10 years look like? And you've got all kinds of pictures you're going to share with us as well. Can you just, I don't know how you want to tell the tale, but how did it end up 10 years, and what was I've heard of Pompeii, I've heard of this book, and you're traveling everywhere. Like, I want to hear it all. Can you walk us through some of it?
Yeah, well, you see, the thing is, when I moved to Rome, I only knew one person who lived there, and he was a professor of art history at the American University of Rome. He was actually a British guy who worked for the American University of Rome as their
Okay.
professor of art history. And I knew him simply because he was a friend of that teacher I had at school. Um, and I mean, one thing I've omitted, which is also important, is that with that teacher, after I left school in the summer holidays, I worked with him on a couple of European courses, which an initiative of the European Union, which was to introduce technology into the classroom for classics teachers. And he was a real technical whiz, writing software as well. So I assist on several of those courses, one of which was hosted at the American University in Rome, which is also how I do this guy. And I asked him, I think it was actually just before I moved there, I asked him, what advice would you give to somebody moving to Rome? And, I was expecting fairly banal, traditional advice about taking every opportunity, all this kind of stuff. But what he said was really struck me, and I've never forgotten it. He cut straight through all that. He said, never forget why you came here. Because the city will throw absolutely everything at you to distract you from this. But remember why you came here. If you do, you'll never get burnt out. And my goodness, was he correct. I mean, there were so many other expats who moved to Rome who get burnt out after a year and off they go. And they realize far too late how little they did, frankly. And why was I there? I was there because of my love of Rome, and because I wanted to know Rome truly and to understand Italy. And so as a result, I'm partial, because once you get there in a new place, it's so easy to fall into a routine.
Right.
You work, you go home, you're tired and stuff. On the weekend, you're tired. There's a temptation to stay at home or just meet friends. But if you're not going out and immersing yourself in the culture, you might as well have not left. There's also a terrible habit among expats to hang around with each other as well, rather than locals.
Right.
Always a disastrous move. And so, armed with that knowledge, I tried to I imposed upon myself, okay, I'll do something new in Rome every week, and I'll do something new in Italy every month. Even something quite modest like seeing a new church or something I hadn't seen before, of which there are 1,500 in Rome, so there's no shortage of that. And then once a month I do some kind of excursion outside the city. And also because when I got my first apartment, I was sharing an apartment with 5 other Italian guys. Yep. So it was a baptism of fire, especially for my cooking. My cooking had to improve sharply. But yeah, so it was thrown in the deep end, and it was kind of the next stage of my education, really. Because you realize if you've never left your bubble, you don't realize that you live in a bubble, and so a lot of things that you believe will be challenged. It's not as though you surrender your beliefs. It's just that when your beliefs are challenged properly for the first time, and that doesn't usually happen in the town where you grew up. So it was a 360-degree illuminating experience. That working, because I worked as a teacher at a school, an English language school for 2 years near Termini Station, and just to give an example of this, growing up in the UK, you are essentially bombarded from birth with the idea that the Catholic Church is just evil, is corrupt, doesn't do anything, it hoards wealth, all this kind of stuff, because that's part of England's founding myth, the Protestant Reformation. And then, for example, because physically walking home from my school, I would pass Termini Station, which anyone who's been to Rome will know is a magnet for beggars or the poor, this kind of thing. The only people you'd see there, week in, week out, giving food and shelter to the people that physically being there at night, were the Knights of St. John. The Italian state, nowhere to be seen. Welfare barely exists in Italy. The church, were it not for the church, you dread to think what would happen, because every year people freeze to death there in winter.
Yeah.
I think, okay, well, they're doing this. There's no fanfare whatsoever. They're here at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and they're there every week. It's not just that. You see them as well. They go out on the seedy roads outside of Rome as well. They talk to the prostitutes who work those streets late at night and try to help them. Italian state, nowhere to be seen. No, not interested. They are the ones who go into the really deprived areas and think, okay, well, not the stereotypes. They exist for a reason, and a lot of it has to do with political narratives and control. But it simply isn't reflected in the reality. I started to really break my worldview that had been ingrained within me. So, it was part of what I was saying at the beginning about my time in Italy was a revelatory experience from many points of view. It challenged a lot of false assumptions that I had, and also because.
Yeah.
Now, I also say to people as well, if I had gone straight into culture in Italy, working in museums or whatever, that would actually not have been, that would have potentially been disastrous as well. The fact that I was a teacher as well, and I, all the way through Italy, and also now I still teach Italians, it introduced me to Italians of every possible walk of life you could imagine. I had university students, I had children, one of my students was actually the physician to Pope Benedict XVI. Bankers as well. I taught members of the Italian Senate, but also, ordinary guys from all over Italy.
Oh, yeah.
And, I learned so much from them about, all kinds of things. And this being Italy, the line between the personal and the professional is blurred. So, even if you've met someone at a business meeting or you've taught them, people will very quickly invite you to social activities, all kinds of random stuff like picking fruit. Things like this. Italy is still a very rural society at heart. To seeing a new exhibition or something, or just a dinner. Italians like to have dinner all the time, and so which is again is very un-English. So through this, it's if you've got a slightly open mind, you flourish in Italy. If you remain closed, then you'll be out within a year.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I think it's important for anybody that travels to kind of be open to seeing things differently, not having these preconceived notions and wanting everything to be how you've pictured it, how you've been told it is, or wanting it to be like your homeland. You're traveling for a reason, you're experiencing a new culture, and even what seems to be I don't know, not the way you would prefer it to be. There's a reason people do it that way, and just open yourself up to kind of seeing it through their eyes. And, you can learn all kinds of things, even if you don't gain that for yourself, that's the way you do things or change your belief system or whatever. You at least can appreciate and understand why your people do it your way and why these people do it their way. And it really does, I don't know, just kind of open the world to you.
It does. I mean, as I say, it's only when you actually interact with these people and that who can actually are in a position to challenge your belief does it change. I mean, from the Anglo-Saxon perspective, we might say, well, Italy is a disorganized, as a poor country, and we might tell Southern Italians, why don't your GDP is lower, this kind of thing, and GDP in America, Britain is higher. It's easy to get a job or like this, get a house, this sort of thing. They would, what their response would be? They'd say, "But are you happier?"
Right.
And think of the implications of that. A lot of things that we take for granted horrify Italians, especially from the south. The existence of nursing homes, for example, retirement homes. In Italian, especially in the south, we would be disgusted at the idea of, sending off an elderly relative to live somewhere else. You take care of them. There's baggage that comes with it, obviously, but you take care of them. That's the thing. A lot of things that, as I say, like that, a lot of things that we take for granted are challenged in interesting ways, because in a sense, especially Southern Italian culture in many ways is the mirror of English culture, Anglo-Saxon culture. And, a lot of, as you said, a lot of traditions, all the ways of doing things exist for a logical reason. And have changed for reasons which are not always beneficial. So, Italy is food for the soul, is a banquet for the soul.
That's great. Well, we're going to dive a little deeper into your time in Italy there. But folks, I want to invite you to please ask your questions. James would love to answer them. I'd love to hear them.
For sure.
Sometimes we have an issue with the X technology. When people try to leave comments, it doesn't always show up on our side. If your comment comes through, we will share it on the screen. So if we're not sharing it and you're asking it, you might have to refresh your browser. Go out of the video and come right back in, and then try again. And usually that does the trick. So we'd love to hear from you. So James, you've told us about your journey to Italy, in your teaching in Rome. Where do you want to take us first? What was kind of, and how do you want to frame this? You want to talk about your kind of grand vision, or did that vision kind of develop as you were, partway through your decade?
Yeah, well, it actually picks up rather neatly from what we were just saying, in the sense that there are so many expats who come to Rome, particularly, the great city, Città d'Arte, the cities of art of Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice, this kind of place. Especially those who come to teach English for a year or so, and then off they go. And I remember there was one man I'll never forget. There was another English guy who taught at my school, and a year after he started, he said, "I feel like I've done Rome now," and he left. And in that last kind of goodbye, I said, I didn't confront him, but it just came up in conversation, like, "Oh, did you see this or that?" And the answer was almost invariably no. And I thought, he's done Rome. He's done almost nothing, but he feel. I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but it's understandable, because it became a routine for him.
Right.
He didn't have that drive to go out and explore. And I think that is what I do not want to end up as. I do not want, above all, the fear that I had was, I do not want one day to leave Italy and realize on those last days how much I could have done but didn't.
Wow. Yeah.
And so at that point, it became really a pressing mission to me. I had this, a lot of us as well, when we travel, we have these lists of places we'd like to see, or even if we're at home, one day I would like to see this place. And of course it never happens. And so when I got married in 2018 on the honeymoon with my wife, we both had the same thing. We had this list of places we wanted to go. And I thought, okay, well, this is not going to happen unless we forced it.
Right.
And so that's when I came up with the idea of, initially we called it 20 regions in 2 years, that we would explore each of Italy's 20 regions over the course of 2 years, no matter what it took, or how much it cost. We would find a way.
Can I ask, is your wife Italian or is she British?
She's Australian. That's right.
That's right. That's how you went back. Okay.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, she's Australian.
And she was up for hanging out in Italy for a couple of years.
She was. I mean, funnily enough, this is how it began, because we met because I did the training for her as a teacher at our school in Rome.
Okay.
After an interview, and she said, she was very much like, I want to get out and explore. I thought, okay, that's kind of how it began, because she was somebody who was actually interested in exploring. Yeah. So it was on the honeymoon I developed this idea to, no matter what it took, we would find a way to make sure that this happened, because there was no guarantee that we would stay in Italy forever, especially as we were having children. Our families, my family lived in England, hers in Australia. She was very family oriented as it was. So I, conscious of that massive weight on my shoulders of knowing that I would never recover if I got to the end of that, knowing that I'd wasted my time. So we basically, there was a rough plan to explore, to have a meaningful experience, we might say, in at least each of Italy's 20 regions. Now, just for those who don't know, Italy administratively is divided into 20 regions. So Tuscany, for example, is one region. Veneto, Piedmont, Sicily, Calabria, all these places are regions. The region in which Rome is Lazio, for example. And see all the places that I always wanted to see, basically. And also to document it as well, with the idea of one day writing a book about it. So along the way, we thought it was a fairly unique perspective as well, in the sense that we could both speak Italian. We were not Italians, obviously, but we had a foot in the country. We worked there, we lived there, we could speak the language, just to talk to as many people as we could as well about what it meant to be from where they were. That was a key part of it as well. It was very much a project, not just a holiday.
Right.
And so, and it was, this ranged from weekends when there was time. We would go out for a day or 2 days, for example, somewhere in Lazio, to bigger things where we'd go for 4 or 5 days somewhere else across the country. and so slowly kind of stitch our way across the map. And the result was what you're about to see on the screen right now. Just sharing the screen.
Let me go here.
Don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So actually, so I put a pin in every one of the places that we visited during that period. From by the way, the colours are coded to the different regions of Italy, the 20 regions. So
that's brilliant.
I mean, I should just hang on. This reminds me actually of a little stat that might be interesting here. Let me just grab it. Right. So during the course of that, we visited 199 towns, villages, or cities. We visited 353 museums, galleries, or archaeological sites, visited 362 churches, set foot on 21 islands, climbed 4 volcanoes across all of Italy's 20 regions.
Wow.
So it was a massive undertaking, as you might imagine, and because also to say, this was not, we made this work as teachers in Italy. So we obviously virtually all of our non-essential income was going towards these, but it is possible to do this while having an ordinary job, so to speak, if you will.
Yeah.
It's not just that we were ultra privileged and took 2.5 years off. We did this all while working. It was obviously very exhausting, but beyond compare. And also, what made it rather dramatic is that when the COVID pandemic erupted, Italy, if you might remember, was the first country in the Western world where it really got serious. I was actually, it was a providence, we might say. In the 19th, 21st of February 2020, I was actually, Katrina was actually, I did this part solo because Katrina was with her brother in Rome at that point, the Veneto. So Padua, Venice, and places like this. Now, I was actually there. As it turned out, I arrived in Padua, the city which is pinned in the middle there. I didn't know it at the time, of course, but the day I arrived was when the first recorded death of COVID-19 occurred in Europe, and he was admitted to hospital in Padua that same night.
Oh,
so
wow.
The pandemic actually, it really, the recorded pandemic began meters away. Although I of course didn't know this until days later.
Yeah.
And I was in we were in Venice because we went for the carnival of Venice, and we were in Venice when the civil protection units muscled into St. Mark's Square to close it down.
Wow.
We were in. I mean, I've actually got a photo of the moment it happened, which I'll just show you.
This is incredible.
Oh, it was pretty dramatic. Yeah.
I was in Japan right before. I was in Japan in February 2020, but it was right before things started getting locked down. So I made it home okay, but it was they were starting to check at the airport and that kind of thing. It was a little, but it wasn't quite as quite the situation you were in.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty, if you just share the just put it on the stage. Yeah. So I was actually in the Museo Correr, which is the museum which runs around St. Mark's Square, and I remember walking through the corridors and my goodness, what an atmosphere. I mean, this was the thing. We arrived in Carnival, beautiful, glorious weather, but with every day that passed, the weather got worse and worse. And the day it actually happened, it was very overcast, cloudy and misty. And you could see the guys in high-vis vests there. This is civil protection officers. They were entering the square to tell everyone to get out, to disperse.
Wow.
The atmosphere was extraordinary. We were in the museum and almost nobody was paying attention to anything. Everyone was watching their phones because this was the day when Bergamo, particularly the city nearby, was starting to get the first recorded deaths. And I remember the wardens, normally in museums who are very kind of docile and not doing much, they were just talking to each other with this look on their face. And all of us just approached the windows looking down into the square, and it was just swarmed by civil protection officers, many of them who were masked. to break it up. And the world, of
Wow.
course, was never the same again, because the next day, it looked like this. If you can just reshare that with yeah. The emptiest you've ever seen St. Mark's Square. Because
So
people were.
they let you stay, but was it just people voluntarily left because they were concerned?
Well, this was the thing. I mean, we had our program to explore Italy, and we had 2 more days there in Venice for the
Yeah.
booking, and it was a lot of people were making a beeline for the station. There was a very clear atmosphere of panic. I mean,
Okay.
what I never, all COVID discourse aside, remember this was February 2020. This was right at the beginning. Nobody had any idea what was going
Sure.
on. I remember vividly. I went into a cafe. There was a pharmacy underneath our hotel, and they all started putting up signs saying "sold out in masks." I went into a bar. Memory I never forget, and somebody coughed behind us, and coughed again. And then the owner of the bar went absolutely ballistic at this person for not covering their mouth.
Wow.
There's this kind of situation. And by the way, in a lot of Italian news agents, they have these kind of boards in front of them which show the headlines of the papers for that day. And that was the day when there was the first recorded death outside of Bergamo, and it was actually getting closer to Venice. Veneto was the first region that was hit. And they were starting to talk about the possibility of shutting down those first towns. So everyone was going for the station. I thought, I said to Katrina, I said, everybody's going for the stations. That is where there's going to be a mass of people. That would be the worst thing to do. Let's just carry on. And and just if things happen, if rules change, we'll just follow those. But if not, let's just carry on as before. There's no point adding to the chaos by swarming the station, which is basically the scene of virtually every disaster film anyway. And so,
right.
But the awkward thing is that after this, Katrina was going back to Rome. I still had 5 days after this in Friuli Venezia Giulia, which is the northeastern region of Italy, Trieste. So I was kind of at this point I was worried that everything was going to close down there, what I was going to do there for 5 days. And of course, with every day that passed, it got worse and worse and worse. Katrina went back to Rome because she was also flying to Australia for what I mentioned before. She was supposed to go to Australia for 2 weeks for passport reasons for our newborn son. Oh my goodness. I got to Trieste, which is the city of the northeast extremity of Italy. And that was the day when they announced that all museums in Italy were closing for a period of what was supposed to be 2 weeks. So I arrived there with the 5 days ahead of me. So I had to get creative very quickly about what I was going to do, because talking to people. Thankfully, the region is interesting enough from the outside that I could still go around and see some interesting things. But I think I have this vivid memory of, because in Trieste there is a beautiful, it's a waterfront city. There's a beautiful Piazza Italia, with these wonderful turn of the 20th century cafes, because Trieste used to be the port of the Austrian Empire. So it's all very Viennese kind of elegance. And I was sitting out there one evening, looking out over the Adriatic, and that was the moment I realized, okay, this is not going to be 2 weeks. This is going to go on for a long time.
Right.
And indeed, there was, when I got back to Rome at the end of that, they'd already shut down the towns in Lombardy. Bergamo was next. They were then talking about shutting down the whole of Lombardy, and there were 3 days to go until Katrina's flights, and I was getting anxious, like, this is where they were starting to cut flights.
Wow.
Fortunately, Emirates brought their flight forward by, I think, 24 hours. And, just to make this all the more dramatic, they took off on the evening, I think it was the 9th of March, 2020, about 7 p.m. 2 hours later is when the national lockdown was introduced. 2 hours later. Wow. So they got out just. But then, of course, began the best part of a year of what happened next.
Right.
So
I can't imagine how hard the separation was for that long. That's incredible.
yeah, it was.
Wow.
I was in our apartment in Rome, and Italy was the first country in the Western world to bring in lockdown.
Yeah.
And Italy's was way more draconian, for example, than that in the UK. You had to fill in a form every time you left the house. You couldn't go out for
Wow.
fresh air at all. You could only leave
Wow.
to buy food, and the police were crawling all over the place.
Oh man.
I was so
And you're
close to
trapped in
getting.
the apartment without your wife. That'd be
Yeah,
really rough.
yeah, and guess
Wow.
what? We of the 20 regions, we guess how many we'd done when the lockdown broke out? 19.
Oh,
19
wow.
with our last one, Sicily, that was supposed to happen in the April. So I was kind of wondering as well, is this going to be over by then? But knowing at the same time that it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
And so 2 weeks became a month became two became 6, and then we got to the summer. It was June when Rome finally started to open up again. And I was all the time, obviously the news was depressing, but I was anxious to get out there as soon as the lockdown lifted because I knew this was a historic moment for Rome. Never had there
Yeah.
been so few people here, so I was
Right.
anxious
Right.
to get out there and photograph the city.
Oh man.
I'd had close scrapes with the law during that period because the regulations were famously unclear about what you could and couldn't do. Also because they were different in different regions. And the government
Oh
had a
yeah.
habit of announcing changes at 10 p.m. in the evening.
Right.
And the penalties were severe, massive fines and potentially prison sentences for violating lockdown rules. So it
Oh
was a
yeah.
tense period.
I'm sure.
But yeah, as soon as it did, though, I was straight out there with my camera because it probably the first time in 150 years there'd been so few people in Rome, and
Oh yeah.
certainly there were no tourists there at all. So as soon as museums and places that were opening to the public again, I was there.
Good for
I mean,
you.
the first one that opened was the Borghese Gallery, and I was actually
Oh wow.
I got the first booking of the first opening because I was watching this every night, and I was actually interviewed by the press when I was there because I was the only foreigner. I was the only foreigner in the group for obvious reasons. And then, which was an amazing experience. I mean, the Borghese Gallery is fairly regulated anyway, so it was mainly for the kind of the thrill of being able to do it in greater peace. But the big one was the Vatican Museums because normally that is
Oh wow.
rammed
Oh
all the time.
yeah. It's so crowded, and you're just kind of being pushed through the whole time. It's like a trout. It's swimming in the stream. You can't stop. You can't go back. You keep moving.
Exactly. I mean, the trick, so to speak, is to visit them in the evening because in the summer months they usually open on after 7 p.m. So they're a lot quieter then. But to visit during the day is, you're like sardines. So I was all over the bookings for that. I thought as soon as it's up, I'm going in. And indeed, I went in with the first batch of visitors. And I had one goal in mind. I said, going in with my camera, there is a shot that I have to get. So I got in first, and I literally bombed it to that part of the museums. And I'll just show you what that was now. If you've been to the Vatican museums, you'll know what I'm talking about here. Hang on. If you could just bring that up.
Let's see. Oh wow! Not a soul in there.
Yeah, the gallery of the maps, which is usually the most crowded part of the museum. So, oh my goodness,
that's incredible.
If you haven't been to Rome or the Vatican Museums, you won't be able to fully appreciate just how busy this room normally is. It is crowded with people to the extent that you're essentially shuffling forward in a queue, especially during the day. But let me tell you this: I mean, when I was there, I could hear the birds singing in the Vatican Gardens. It was
beautiful.
To be able to experience that, unless you're going right in the middle of the night here, this would have been impossible prior to the 1960s. So to do that was, the most busy, one of the busiest, most crowded places in Rome suddenly became an immensely spiritual experience. And, going into the Sistine Chapel, of course, which likewise is usually very busy, shall we say, with
Yes.
people shouting shush and be quiet.
Absolutely. Right. When I the first time I went there, I had, well, by the way, Liberty Mom says you could sell that photo, and absolutely this could be on one of these stock photo websites for sure. Observer of Culture says incredible. Absolutely. Yeah, my first time going to the Vatican, I had these ideas of the Sistine Chapel. I'd seen all the photos in a book, so I'm thinking they're going to be right there. I'm going to be able to see it in large detail and all this. And it's going to be this holy experience, all this. And we get into the Sistine Chapel, and the ceiling's quite high, and we're packed in there like sardines. And there was a priest or some sort of Vatican official with a microphone saying, "Silencio, Silencio," just like nonstop shouting, "Be quiet." And it was like, it was such a clash of, like, we're trying to be quiet, but this guy's shouting at us, but we're trying to appreciate it, but we're shuffling, and it's hard to, you can't take photos. It was just kind of like, I don't know. It was stressful.
Exactly, and he cycles through many languages to say "be quiet" as well, so it never really stops.
Yeah.
I mean, there are always people there who are trying to sneak a photo with a flash, which triggers them, obviously. It's difficult. I mean, if you visit at night, it's a bit different. But even then, compared to this, I was at the Sistine Chapel, and you obviously couldn't take photos even then. So I'm afraid I can't show you one. But as I was one of the only people in there, they would have spotted me immediately if I'd lifted the photo. By the way, the reason you can't take photos in the Sistine Chapel has zero to do with conservation. It's simply because a Japanese television company owns the copyright to images in the Sistine Chapel.
Right. You can buy the book once you get through, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Because they paid for the restoration of the chapel, so part of the deal was that they got the copyright. Yeah. So I'd feel a lot less bad about that when people do it, because, as I say, a lot of people assume it's conservation, but it's not at all.
Right.
But being in there, I realized, hundreds of years ago, when papal elections took place, when the College of Cardinals was a lot smaller than it is now, this is it's a taste of what it was actually like. The awe of the images around you are enhanced by the atmosphere of this actual silence, as opposed to the fake one which normally prevails. So that was extraordinary. And as I say, these little things, because the windows were open because this was the middle of June, so it was hot. But listening to the crickets and the birds and being able to hear them outside was, because I've been to the Vatican museums innumerable times. I led many tours there as well, private tours. So I as I say, I've been dozens of times. But that was, I'm glad I managed to get in there, because I messaged my parents. Like, my dad is a skilled photographer, and I got much of what I learned from him, and he was literally saying, "I'm dying with jealousy." back in England.
Oh man!
So I was I was doing this all the way through. As soon as stuff was opening, I was straight there.
Good for you! What an incredible experience. Well,
it was.
Well, where would you like to take us next on your journey through Italy? And let me ask you this, okay? Let me ask a couple questions as you're thinking about that. First of all, Liberty Mom says, "Wow, just overall on your time in Italy, what was your favorite place? What was your least favorite?" You can answer that now, or maybe as you're going through. But let me ask you, as you kind of approached each region, was there a particular thing you did in each region to kind of compare? Was there a certain cultural experience or site you tried to investigate, or was it just every place you went, it was just kind of something different?
There was certainly a place. Well, this was the thing. Towards the start, it was much more kind of structured and regimented, in a traditional sense. But the more we went around, the more I realized I had to leave time for spontaneous stuff, because there's always going to be something you don't know about, and the books don't know about, but the locals do. That happened a lot, because as I say, we made a distinct effort to talk, to as many locals as we could, and they'd often come out with phenomenal things. So, but regardless of that, every region, there were certainly priorities. So basically the most representative sites of the region, not necessarily in terms of museums and pals this kind of thing. Could be there are lots of natural wonders in each region as well. I mean, just to show you, I mean, for example, in if you can, if you could share the one that's called Alpe di Siusi.
Oh yeah! Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah, I mean that was a memory which is so positive in the purest and most wholesome sense.
Yeah,
I was aware of it while I was there. This place is just heaven on earth. So this is in the far north of Italy, on its border with Austria, which is the South Tyrol, the North Tyrol, which is in Austria today. But this region was indeed Austria until the end of the First World War, when Italy annexed it. So it's this is the beautiful alpine landscape of the Dolomites, and to reach this place, it won't be obvious from the photo. This is very, very high up. I mean, the mountain is obviously high, but where I'm standing on the plateau is a plateau, which is, to reach this, you need to take a cable car. It's the highest and largest of the alpine meadows. Alpe di Siusi, it's called. This place is just heaven on earth. All you hear is just delicate breezes, the little ringing of the cowbells. The people who live here, my goodness, what a life they have.
Wow.
It's just so pristinely heavenly. It just beggars belief. So, as I say, it's not all about culture in the literal sense of going to museums, but also knowing the land as well, because Italy is such a varied country in every sense of the word. So there were things like that. Italy varies.
Amazing.
Varies from this. If you can you share the slide, which is called Città di number 33. Città di Bagnoregio, for example. Yeah, and places like this as well, where the town is literally crumbling off the edge of the cliff. You can only reach it by that narrow bridge. This is in Lazio, by the way. It's about an hour's drive from Rome. And then...
would this be like east of Rome, or which direction from Rome?
Northwest. Northwest of Rome. Because Lazio... I mean, this is also partially answers a question as well. Lazio, which is the region that surrounds Rome, is easily one of the most undervalued regions of Italy, because everyone will, of course, go make a beeline for Rome for understandable reasons. I'm not saying that pejoratively, but the region is so rich of wondrous places. Like this is one of them, for example. Another one I'll just show you now is it's just. Should be there. Did that work? Oh, okay. Not to worry. Hang on. I'll just be easier if I just share the screen, because I think there's a slight error with that file. Actually, what was voted the most beautiful garden in Italy, which is in Lazio, is, I'm just showing it on my screen right now. So if you could just flip the thing around.
Yep. Wow.
Look at that.
That's
Villa Lante.
Beautiful. What's the name?
It's called Villa Lante, and it's located just outside the city of Viterbo, in the northwest of Lazio. That region, because in ancient Roman times, the river Tiber, which flows through Rome, was the southern boundary of Etruria, so the territory of the Etruscans. So everything between the river Arno in Florence and the river Tiber in Lazio was Etruria. So you've got this Etruscan territory, these beautiful hilltop towns, 2,500 years ago, which were converted into these wondrous medieval gems, which are totally undisturbed by the modern world, because modern tourism just doesn't know of them. And this, by the way, was voted the most beautiful garden in Italy a few years ago. Such are the treasures of...
I'm sorry to interrupt. While you're telling us about all this, Observer of Culture says, any hidden gems you would like to share with us? I believe you're kind of revealing them to us as we go here, but feel free to add, beyond this. But yeah, great question, Observer of Culture.
Indeed, definitely. This is definitely one of them. Because it's... both for we're looking down onto the more organized part of the garden, but behind me is the more naturalistic version, half of it, where there are these extravagant, incredible water features. And one of them, One of them, which is impossible to actually capture in a photo because you have to. It's it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to appreciate it properly. There's this table basically where the water feature is such that the water stream ran atop the table and then down into the waterfall. The idea was that the guests could wash their fingers, in the water while having their meal without having to leave the table.
Wow.
And the water flows down down this cascade towards those ponds down there. And it was really one of the first gardens of Italy to be like this, what is so-called a so-called mannerist garden, the idea of using a garden to celebrate man's domination over nature. So it really is just an absolute gem of a place, and shows you again, the achievements of which they were capable in the 16th century. And because it can't be overstated, this we take it for granted today that a garden is beautiful and is ornamental. But until the 16th century, it was considered functional. It was a kitchen garden. You grew herbs and fruits or whatever the vegetables there. But in the 16th century, the idea returned in the Western world that a garden could be a centerpiece. And this is really one of the first to be like that. That was designed to be as such. So it really is it's a historical gem as well as being a visual treat. So there's that. I mean, that's definitely one of them, which I would strongly urge everyone to visit. I mean, it's also just down the road from Viterbo, which is another hidden gem. It's the best preserved medieval center in Italy, and which we will be, in our Invictus articles, we were returning to this week because the first ever papal conclave was held in Viterbo. Otherwise, it's another treat as well from Lazio.
Liberty Mom said it instantly transports you back in time. It for sure does. And one thing I want to point out, part of that being transported back in time, that was a good perspective you pointed out about the garden. A fancy garden today may not feel as impressive because we've seen them everywhere. But if you have that perspective that this was something new, revolutionary they were doing, and so much of art, I think, is that way. We see a Leonardo today or something like that, and we've seen what's come beyond that. And it's some people find it easy to not be impressed by these, but to recognize them for their achievement at their time, and in the context. And that's why when I do travel, it's so important to either have a good tour guide that can, transport you back in time and give you the context, help you to appreciate what you're seeing, or to go into it prepared ahead of time, which there's a good account on X called Beautiful Histories. Shelly, she's been a guest on our show before, and that's kind of her game, is to help people prepare before they go, to kind of extend the vacation and also help them to appreciate what they're seeing when they get there. So find a good tour guide or be well prepared when you go. So I believe you shared another.
Indeed. So this is another little town, not too far away, again, in northwestern Lazio. It's called Calcata, where the relic of the Holy Prepuce was long reported to have been held. Just look at it. The town is, it's like a bucket of town which has been poured on top of a cliff.
That is unbelievable.
Again, another place which is reached only by a fairly narrow rock bridge. And people still live there. Still a community, and people live there. So,
in little frozen in time places like this, what do the people do for work? I mean, it can't just be tourism. It doesn't look like they're doing much farming. Up there. What exactly? How do they live?
I mean, there are lots of towns like this, especially in Lazio, and basically agriculture. I mean, Italy, the lifeblood of the Italian economy is family-run businesses, small family-run businesses. So from ranging from bookbinders to carpenters, this kind of thing, or just agriculture usually. So that's usually the mainstay. Although in Calcutta, specifically this place, it gained a reputation for being a haven for artists, kind of escaping from the city, if you will. So it's got a very much an artistic vibe to it as well, which contributed to its popularity among Italians for tourism. Quite a lot of Italians go there to visit, but foreigners zilch. Because again, it's in Lazio outside of Rome, so it's off the radar. But this is the jewel of Lazio because it's preserved visually, but also spiritually in a sense. the town is as it was 500 years ago, but the community is still there as well. And you don't see tacky tourist shops or things like that there. It's all very authentic. Now, the word authentic gets thrown around a lot when people are talking about Italy and tourism, and often when people say authentic, they actually mean old-fashioned. But I mean authentic in the real sense, in the sense that it's not fake and presented for tourists. It's an actual genuine community. So there's sorry.
That's oh no, I was just going to say I imagine at each of these places also. I mean, I've spent, I think, only a little over 3 weeks in Italy total. So I obviously have just scratched the surface. But traveling around, it seems like each location, each village, each even major city has its own identity, its own feel. You can't just visit one and feel like you've gotten to know the Italian way. It definitely is a conglomeration of different cultures, I guess.
Totally, absolutely. I mean, every country obviously has their variation, but Italy is extreme to a large degree because so much of it was, Italy was a checkerboard of independent states for 1,000 years. It's only an infant as a unified state. So, as a result,
man, I would love to have. Right. I would love to have. I don't know if you guys will do it on Invictus at some point, or if we could discuss it at some point. But just the unification. I recently watched the Netflix series The Leopard, and there was the original from I think 1963, Il Gatto Pardo, with Burt Bacharach, I think. But in the States, I never learned about the unification of Italy or the history or how the people felt about it. But from watching the series, it really has me intrigued as to the attitude towards it, and just kind of how that carries over to today. I think they just recently celebrated the anniversary of their military, maybe, but just kind of like a nationalistic identity today. What does that feel like compared to 100 years ago, 200 years ago? But that's a whole other tangent, I think.
It is. It may come up shortly. Venosa, yes, absolutely. Venosa, yes, indeed. I actually, did I have a picture of it here? I may not have one handy, but yes, I did spend time in Venosa, ancient Venusium, where the poet Horace was born. Beautiful place in Basilicata, for those who don't know. And another gem, definitely a gem to respond to his overcultures question as well. Beautiful preserved historic centre in a really beautiful landscape. Basilicata, which if Italy is a boot, then Basilicata is the instep of the boot. Was traditionally one of Italy's poorest regions historically, and kind of as a result, most of its towns are immaculately preserved because there's been very little modern development there. And ironically, it's kind of ironic because the capital of Basilicata, Potenza, is really quite ugly because it was badly bombed. But the rest of the region is a different kettle of fish. There's a very much, I mean, Venosa, for example, as you say, there's a beautiful abbey just outside the walls where the first Norman adventurers are buried. So Robert Guiscard, for example, is buried there. His tomb is labeled as Terror Mundi, the terror of the world. So it was the first mausoleum of the Hortevilles, so the Normans who conquered southern Italy. So it's got this very it's in a sense it's kind of a spiritual capital of the south in many ways. So that that's an important part of its identity too. But at the same time, very authentic, and I mean that properly, authentic town where everybody works in something which is kind of useful rather than it being for show. It's also, I think it's also one of the borghi più belli d'Italia, which for those who don't know, Italy keeps there's this organization called Borghi più belli d'Italia, which literally means the most beautiful towns in Italy. And they keep an updated log of the top 100 and 150, whatever, beautiful towns in Italy, and Venosa is indeed one of them. As is Calcutta, which you're seeing on the screen. So that's a useful guide as well for those looking for interesting places that they haven't heard of that they'd like to explore, because they're usually authentic and beautiful and generally speaking pretty unknown, even among many Italians. Yeah, Mosquito, no. I alas have not, but Venosa, yes. And Basilicata I explored quite extensively. Wonderful, wonderful region. I mean, this isn't Venosa, it's somewhere else, but get a load, if you will, of this gem in Basilicata. That may or may not work on the... Oh, it did. Fantastic. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Because everybody's heard, well, most people have heard of the Dolomites in the Alps, but there's actually another range of Dolomites in the Italian south, in Basilicata. It's called the Lucanian Dolomites. And this is what we're seeing right here. This is the town of Castelmezzano, which is spilled on the edge of the Dolomites, the Lucanian Dolomites. And that's a really interesting example because that is an example of a town which was very, very poor, was suffering, was dying. And then about 20 years ago, a couple of Frenchmen visited the town and was essentially by accident. But they saw it and thought, this needs a flying fox, which is what in Italian they call, what do we call it in English? Like a zip line, I suppose you'd call it.
Oh, okay.
Like a glorified, not a zip line where you're just hanging on like this, but one where you're in a proper suit and it's as though you're flying forward.
Right, yes.
And
these two incredible here.
Exactly. I mean, it's not on the photo, but just off to the right, there's a very steep gorge, very steep, a chasm, and then on the other side, there's another outcrop of Dolomite. So these two Frenchmen convinced the mayor to invest in this, and they did. And that town has gone, its fortunes have turned around completely. It's now desirable and fairly prosperous, despite, it looks very modest and rustic, and it is. But because of this thing, it's... in fact, if you look at the photo, it might be very difficult to see here, but on the right-hand outcrop, right at the bottom of that, where it meets the town, you can see a little fence. Directly below that, immediately below that, there's a exactly flat horizontal black line. It's very thin on the photo. That is actually the zip line. It's very fine, but it's visible there. Yeah. So that was a remarkable. So in a way, it's kind of marketed itself as this kind of alpine town of the south, and it turned the town's fortunes around. So it's an example of a novel approach to resurrecting suffering communities. So that was a really interesting place. Again, this is
well, James. Let me ask: Did you partake of the zip line?
I didn't, because we had an infant son at the time.
So that's a good excuse.
Also because I was there with my family, and I was the only one who would have probably
sure
to be as my parents as well. But once you get to the other end, it's a bit of a mission getting back as well.
I can imagine. Wow.
Well, but again, this is a place that nobody's heard of, but it's amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Man, it could be a whole nother discussion talking about travel plans for Italy. I'm actually my sister, who has never been to Italy, Carrie, hello if you're watching, my brother, who's never been to Italy, and my mother, who's never been to Italy. The four of us are going to go next year. No spouses, just my mom and her three kids. And so we have not put together an itinerary yet, but obviously first time for those three, they're going to want to see Rome. There's some things in Florence they want to see, Venice. So quickly an itinerary fills up, but we are looking for, particular gems or something like that would be good to add. So
sorry. Yeah.
I'm just going to say within the next year, I might be hitting you up, or maybe do another show or something and kind of talk about stuff like that.
Well, definitely. I think thinking of that, and also at the same time answering both of the questions as well. I mean, my favorite places, so to speak, in Italy. I mean, my answer is, I suppose, threefold. In terms of beauty of the landscape, the South Tyrol, which we saw a photo of it earlier, is stunning. Is unearthly in its beauty. but I feel like that is a slight con as well because it's only been part of Italy for 100 years. So an absolutely Italian place, which is, if you could just share the image I've just uploaded there, which for me is really just heaven. Val d'Orcia, which is a valley in the south of Tuscany. Now, the Siena, is obviously quite well known, but the province of Siena, of which it's capital, especially to the south and east, is really some of the most beautiful terrain on God's earth. This area is quite unique geographically in that large parts of it are actually classified as a desert. It's called the Desert of Acana. And because of the clay in the soil, almost nothing can grow there except these cypress trees, these iconic trees of Tuscany. So, images like this are kind of stereotypical of Tuscany, but they're all taken in this single part of Tuscany, Val d'Orcia. And historically, it was through this area that the Via Francigena, which was the pilgrim's road from Canterbury to Rome, where it passed through. So at the height of those days of pilgrimage, these towns flourished, towns like Siena itself, you've got San Quirico d'Orcia, you've got Montepulciano, Montalcino, areas which today are famous for their wines.
Right.
And it goes directly through. This is also in the valley next to a dormant volcano as well. It is so, transcendent to go there. It's very much a lost valley. And the towns there, as I say, there's zero urban sprawl whatsoever. Every town remains within its medieval walls. But, they're quite thriving communities at the same time. I mean, wine turned them around. They were very poor until the 60s. But the planting of wine is what made them quite prosperous. But these days, if you go there, because the jewel of Tuscany is you've got these beautiful landscapes, but the towns are very, very rustic. Despite the kind of refined image of Florence, Tuscany is very rustic. I mean, even in Florence, the authentic places to eat will all be very rustic fare. Like, wild boar, for example, is eaten, these stews, things like that. Salami, cheeses, honey. It's quite an interesting dichotomy, and this is the part of Tuscany to go to live that life. But also Tuscany is also very elegant. So everything is done very well and presented very beautifully, and people take good care of what they own. So it really is just a pleasure to go there.
Observer of Culture says these photographs are incredible, James, and I second that. These really are stunning, and I really, really, I know it's probably a ways off, but when your book is published, I will be eager to thumb through it and then see the photographs because these really are stunning. They're just incredible.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, as I say, my travels in Italy that was a key part of it, was documenting it as well. And as I learned a lot about photography from my father, but I learned on the road as well. But Italy's worth. Italy is a beautiful country and is worthy of being recorded well. So that was my aim, to record it in words and in images.
Just
and also thinking in terms of the book as well, because Italy's bureaucracy is so horrendous, it's very difficult to get the rights to publish photos of interiors. So, particular emphasis is on exteriors and landscapes as well, of which, fortunately, there are a great many.
Yes, it really is incredible. Speaking of the food, the fare of these different places, when I travel, I try to try the local dishes and what the the local people, their historic meals, whatever. When we were in Florence, we tried to find a place off the beaten path, down an alleyway. We find this little bar, and it has seating in the basement for food. So we're down there, and the menu, it actually did have some English on it, and there was something that was, I think it was bruschetta. I can't remember what the rest of the description was, but it was like Misty something bruschetta, and he said, "Well, it's bruschetta with like 4 local sauces." And so in the United States, they call it bruschetta, and it'll be like toast with chopped tomato, basil, garlic. This is what we're expecting, and they bring this plate, and we didn't recognize anything, and we were like, "What is this?" So I had an idea of what some of them were, and I didn't want to tell my wife. I was like, "Let's just eat them first, and then we'll ask the waiter what these are." So we ate all of them, and then he explained one was just a slice of lard, which is not normal American fare. One was truffles with like olive oil. You know, it was like a minced pate kind of. One was chicken liver pate, and then the fourth one was raw pork sausage, which for an American, you know, we're so concerned about eating undercooked meat and especially pork or something. You know, I was speaking last week with somebody about food in Japan and eating raw chicken, raw egg. You know, like you would never do that in the United States, but we ate the raw pork, the raw sausage, and we lived to tell about it. So we had our experience. We always remember that. But yeah, you should try that when you travel. Definitely go for the local fare, and you know.
Definitely. Well, it's crucial to remember here. You know, a lot of the hang-ups we have about, you know, raw this, raw that. I mean, I'm not saying it's all nonsense. Obviously, it depends on what you're dealing with. But, you know, there is wisdom here that's like in Italian cooking, which is centuries old. You know, they know what they're doing. Before, you know, food guidelines of the 1980s and 90s came in. So, as you say, I mean, but this is the thing which kind of, you know, people are, you know, the pretentious, you know, Italy's famous for its food, but, you know, when we talk about places well known for their food, this kind of pretentious haute cuisine sort of stuff, that's French. It's not Italian. Italian food is about the focus specifically on authentic ingredients, simplicity, and it being rustic, and basically cucina povera, as it's called in Italian, literally poor cooking. So the kind of stuff that were eaten by the poor until the 20th century. So you've got really basic ingredients, often which were innards, based around innards. So in Tuscany and Lazio, you often have dishes based around intestines, stomach. In Rome, even because they had to, you know, make do with 2 or 3 ingredients, that, you know, they became very, very good at it. And
you broke up.
You know,
you broke
Rome,
up there when I'm sorry, when you were speaking about Rome. There was a pause in the feed, so I couldn't hear. What was the ingredients in Rome?
Apologies. Yeah. So intestines, stomach, brain, even.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which is often what's the word I'm looking for? Euphemistically referred to as sweetbread, is pancreas.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the really typical classic Roman dishes is rigatone con la paiata, so pasta with intestines. And you know, I always introduce this to people in Rome, and I obviously never tell them what it is until afterwards, because you know, preconceptions, everything. But it's amazing. You know, they've been cooking it for hundreds of years. They know how to do it well. So
well, let me ask. I had heard that kind of, if you will, the ketchup of ancient Rome was like a fermented fish sauce, and they would kind of like put it all over everything. Does anybody still produce this? Have you ever tried it? Is it still used today?
Not really. I mean, garum is the Latin name for it. Was that fish sauce, which was a major export of Pompeii, among other places. But no, it's not really made. But I mean, there's lots of kind of curiosities like that. I mean, just one example, which might be entertaining: the island of Sardinia, which likewise tends to be overlooked when we're talking about Italy. It is one of Italy's 20 regions, after all. The island of Sardinia is unique in the Mediterranean, is that it's the only island which has almost no tradition of seafood. Because Sardinia is not at all a coastal civilization. It was not a coastal. The Nuragic people, who were the indigenous Sardinians, lived in the mountains in the interior. So if you go there, you expect to eat good fish, you're going to be disappointed. And indeed, one of its the mountains of Sardinia are notorious for these very, very weird and wonderful culinary things. And one of them, which I was intent on trying, was actually banned by the European Union because of health and safety reasons, which is a cheese, the maturation of which is spurred on by maggots that live inside it.
Wow. You're pretty adventurous, James. I think I'd have to pass on that one.
I mean, I'd heard of this cheese, and it's quite an important part of the culture. And the fact that it's been banned by the European Union of all people only reassured me that it's something I had to find. But I was thinking, I wonder if it is possible to find it. So when we were in Sardinia for a week, and everywhere we went, I was looking out for it. I mean, one of the most iconic Sardinian dishes, indeed, actually is pork. So that was pork cooked with on myrtle leaves. So that was something that's easy to find. But when we were in the mountains, I had this list of dishes I wanted to try. I always have, when I go to the region, there's always the dishes which I must try. And indeed, kazumarzu, which is the name of this cheese, differently to Italian, a lot of words in Sardinia end with the letter U, kazumarzu. And I was getting, I think maybe it's just not going to be possible. But I kid you not, on the last night before we returned to Cagliari, we were staying in the mountains on the way back from the north of the island. And we arrived quite late at night, about 9 p.m. in the evening. It was dark. I had no idea where to. It was just a stop off for accommodation, basically. So we went randomly, found a place that was open, and I saw it on the menu. And I had this. We were essentially the only customers in the restaurant as well. So we had this rather wonderful situation where I ordered this kazumarzu, and there were about 10 waiters standing around watching because they had nothing else to do. So they couldn't hide it. So I tried it. And, it's not good. It's, a lot of these dishes which people get, freaked out about, say is disgusting, it is exaggerated. A lot of it is, if you've got a certain taste, you like it. The only dish I tried in Italy, which made me feel horrendous, was that. I mean, the initial taste was good. The aftertaste was awful. It was like reflux, vomit reflux and earwax, this kind of thing. And it was awkward because all the staff were there, so I couldn't really just dispose of it. So I had to keep going. my wife was pregnant at the time, so she couldn't touch it.
Oh my goodness!
So that was an ordeal.
That's fantastic. That's a memory forever. That's fantastic. So I'll ask a quick question, and then we've got a comment here from Observer of Culture. When I went to, I told you earlier, I went to the UK for a couple of weeks. I saw at breakfast Marmite, so I had to do a Marmite taste test. And for me, Marmite, for those that don't know, it's like a fermented yeast byproduct, right? I don't know if they use it after brewing or something like that, but they spread it on toast and things like that. To me, the way that I described it is like earwax. I mean, not that I eat earwax, but everybody kind of has an idea of,
I know
the smell of earwax or something like that. That is how Marmite was for me. Now, sir, being from the UK, have you partaken of Marmite? Do you enjoy Marmite?
Well, it's funny you say that because I grew up in Derby, which is about 10, 15 miles away from Burton-upon-Trent, where Marmite is made. So, when you drive, my father used to work in a hospital there, so we would often go there. And when you approach it, you can smell it in the air. I don't like it, and it's funny because there's also an Australian variant of this called Vegemite.
Vegemite,
And so my mother's Australian, father's English, so you've got this clash all the time. Vegemite's better than Marmite and all this sort of stuff. I think they're both disgusting. But it's a common thing. I guess it's one of those things that's probably slowly dying, but it's a uniquely kind of English breakfast thing to, as you say, spread it on your toast in the morning or things like this. But the taste is reminiscent of kazumarzu. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I tried it. Again, try new things when you travel. Yeah. Observer of Culture says, have you visited the Casa Professa in Palermo?
Yes, I have. I'll answer that properly just to say, just one thing I just want to add about the food thing is that because while it's on that subject, it means I tried innumerable dishes in Italy. Probably the most out there one after kazumarzu was in Piedmont, which is the northwestern region of Italy, of which Turin is the capital. Is probably Italy's most elegant in the old-fashioned sense of the word. It's got a very strong French influences. Wine culture is very good. Very expensive wines are produced there. It's where a lot of truffles come from too. Now, Turin itself is is a real gem of Italy. I strongly urge everyone to go there. It is a stunningly beautiful city. It's also the one of the Italian capitals that was actually planned from essentially from scratch in the 18th century. So it's an organized kind of Baroque city, and you've got the shoulders of the Italian Alps in the background. It's just beautiful. But one of the dishes there, as per Italy is always rustic at heart. If you just add to the stage there, I've added a photo I took into your in.
Wow.
It's called La Financiere is the dish. Kind of looking at it, looks as though the dish is called the Financier or something. Gives you no clue of what's actually in it, but it's actually a stew which is prepared with the crests of cockerels. So literally the frill of cockerels, and you can see them there.
Wow.
Just cooked on the stew. Absolutely delicious, though.
Most people won't touch it because the feathers, the actual feathers.
Not the feathers, but the fleshy kind of.
Crests, right. Okay, that stands up the. Okay.
Exactly. Wow. Yes, it's a stew made of that, and also kind of kidneys and various bits of innards as well. It was also the favourite dish of Cavour, who was the first Prime Minister of the United Italy. So that one was a one which a lot of people wouldn't ever dare touch, but that was actually good. That was delicious.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, that's in there. That's awesome. Great.
Blessed Turin. Yeah, so to turn to Observer's question, which kind of brings us to the latter part of the adventures at the same time, is that in the summer of 2020 is when the lease on our flat expired. I had no clue whatsoever whether I was going to be able to see my wife and son again in a month's time or in 2 years. No idea. And so, but I had to do something because our rent ended. So it was no longer, it wasn't possible to renew the lease. So, as I said, before the pandemic broke out, we had done 19 regions. The only one that was left was La Sicilia, Sicily. So I thought, okay, I'd originally planned to go there for about a week or so. That couldn't happen because of the closures and stuff. So it got to the summer, and I thought, okay, let's all assumptions are now off the table. I'm just going to go all out. So as I said, everything I couldn't carry went into storage in Rome. And so I was basically whacked back to where I'd been in 2012 with just my suitcase and my backpack, really. And so through a friend who I'd met years ago, I got in contact with a guy in Palermo, so the capital of Sicily, and through him managed to get a flat, which was available from the 1st of September. And thankfully they were prepared to be flexible in the sense that I explained the situation and said, I have no idea what's going on, but if we could get to a situation perhaps where it can be renewed on a monthly basis. They were extremely kind and agreed to do that, so that was fantastic. But that I couldn't move in until the 1st of September, and this was mid-June. So I was basically a nomad for a couple of months. So I went to Bologna first of all, and worked my way down Italy on the eastern coast for Bologna, Marche, those areas. And then finally I got back in time to get a train from Rome to Sicily, which, by the way, is kind of a rite of passage in Italy to reach Sicily by train, because it's quite a thing. When you reach the Strait of Messina, which is the waterway which separates Italy from Sicily, there is a dedicated train that crosses it, and it's quite it's a thing because the train drives onto the ferry. Well, the doors come up and you cross, and it's
wow.
There's a famous kind of fast food joint, if you will, on the boat, which sells arancino, which is the typical street food of Sicily. And a lot of Sicilians joke that it's cooked in the engine oil of the boat because it's so unhealthy. But you've got to do it. You've got to do it. That is the correct introduction to Sicily. So I did that. It's a long journey by train. I took the train from Rome to Catania, and it was, I think, almost 12 hours. So it was overnight, and it was delayed by 3 hours setting off as well, which didn't help. But so from that moment on, I was in Sicily, but I still had a month to go before my lease began in Palermo. So I traveled across east and central Sicily throughout that time. And in a way, the fact that my wife and child went with me, allowed me to do a lot of things that would have been impossible before. So I climbed Mount Etna, for example, which was quite an experience, to put it lightly. I do have a photo here, a photo or two here. Bear with me a second. Which, by the way, for those who don't know, is the highest volcano on the European continent.
Okay. Wow.
And it was, now the activity of the volcano fluctuates, obviously, but fortunately, in inverted commas, the day I did climb it, it was pretty active.
Wow.
So, yeah, and as I was getting there, because what you do is, and those who know will know about this, everybody can reach a certain height on Etna. There's an initial place called the the Rifugio Sapienza, I think it's called, is the initial launching point. And then most people go up to the Torre del Filosofo. But then to reach the true summit of Mount Etna is a bit of a more serious deal. You cannot go without a guide. So I was on the bus. I was originally intending to go to the kind of 2/3 point, but then the guy said, "Okay, we're going to do. There's a climb to the summit today. If you're prepared to do it, let me know." And I thought, okay, this is a sign. It's now or never.
Now or never, right?
Because I'd been to Etna 10 years ago before with my teacher when I visited Sicily, but I hadn't been able to do that. So I thought, this is a sign. Okay. Now, as I say, it's a bit more serious. You have to wear hardcore boots because the ground underneath you is hot. If you put your hand into the soil, for example, to this depth, you'll scald your fingers.
Whoa.
Yeah, and you could feel the heat through your feet. And apart from that as well, there's the fumes. Mick, great. Welcome, brother. Top man. Etna is beautiful, the Baltic. Yes, indeed. I mean, the image that I've taken here was not from the actual summit itself. It was on the way up. But when I did get close to the top, because there's multiple craters of Etna, because every time it erupts, it opens up new fissures. And as I was climbing the main one, the mother crater, one of the other ones was going off as well, which I'm just showing into the stream right now. So you can just switch to that one, 206, I think it's called, listed as.
Wow.
Yeah. So, really, once you reach this height, you've left Earth. I can't put it any other way, because the ground is so far below you. And actually, when I went to Sicily before, the day I went to Etna, it was very cold and it was quite snowy as well. And the fog was so dense that you couldn't see a thing. The day I went in 2020, it was pristine. And actually, in those conditions, you can see the entire eastern coast of Sicily. And indeed the toe of Italy as well. And just the final chapter of that experience, a photo that I took inside the actual main crater itself. Goodness, that was an experience, because I was climbing bear in mind that this was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. We were just about to clear the lip on the Cratere Maggiore, or whatever it is called. Bocca Nuova, I think it's actually called. People just started coughing. As I say, this is the middle of COVID, so everyone's just thinking, "Oh goodness, what's going on now?" You soon understood why, though, because when I cleared the top, my goodness, it was, it's not that it was hot, but the sulfur in the gas, the fumes which hit you is so strong that your eyes sting like crazy in the back of your the back of my throat. It was though I'd suddenly gone from nothing to having the worst sore throat imaginable. It hits you in the back of the throat to that degree, and you can't not cough. It's over, and as a result, you cannot spend more than 10 minutes up there. For safety reasons, otherwise you risk dying. So I'll just show you that I did, however, manage to. And it was also because there's strong winds up there as well. I had very wholesome moments where my camera lens went into the dust on the floor, the volcanic dust. And there was a Hungarian guy who was with me. He was a photographer who had a spare cloth and helped me
nice.
clean the lens. So I was fortunately able to get this photo that I'm just about to show you of the interior of the crater itself. Just bear with me. I'm just showing it on the share screen.
Wow, that's spectacular.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm limited by the field of view of the camera here, but it's going quite a long way in different directions. I mean, the crater is colossal. You can see the sulfur, obviously, the patches of it there, and the fumes that are coming out of it. But as I say, the one thing you can't get across from the photo is just what an absolute assault it is on your body to be up there.
Wow. Now, I know you shared before on I think you were talking about Pliny and Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius. Yep. And you had climbed Mount Vesuvius and looked down. And I shared, my wife and I did that also. And that's a much, much lower elevation than this. And there was not near the amount of fumes coming out. But definitely you could see like deposits of sulfur on the rocks and things like that from the constant flow. And that was an experience I will never forget. That was quite amazing.
Well, indeed. Sorry.
It looks like Micamius says there's no other way to explain it. The higher you go, the more beautiful it becomes. You look at life differently, for sure.
Exactly. You can't not do it because, as I say, you feel like you're leaving Earth behind. You can understand why it was such an intensely holy place to the ancient Greeks, for example. And by the way, Sicily is intensely volcanic. Apart from Mount Etna, you've got the island of Stromboli, which is the most active volcano in the world, which in the Ionian Islands, it's just an archipelago off the northern coast of Sicily. And again, when I went there, it was very much a thing of I could do it because the family wasn't with me, was to ascend Stromboli, which I'm just showing effect. But I actually caught a lava blast on the camera for this one, so I'll show you.
Whoa!
This one. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is fantastic.
So I was really lucky to be able to get that because that was very much a moment you had to. It was I had one shot and it had to be right, and it was also dark, which didn't help. As I say, it's the most active volcano in the world. So again, hearing the rumbles in the earth below you and the explosion, because it's impossible to show the photograph, but the rocks which are blown out of the crater roll down the flanks into the sea, because Stromboli is also an island. It's just an indescribable feeling of the raw power of nature, feeling the ground beneath you rumble. Oof,
I can't imagine.
I mean, because living in Italy for 10 years, I experienced earthquakes as well. So other kinds of phenomena like that was likewise unsettling, but this was on kind of a whole other level because you're aware of the power that's below your feet.
Right, it's right there with you. Yeah, you're right next to it. I don't know if this is a good segue into Pompeii or if you have more you want to share before we get there, but I heard you talk about actually working at Pompeii for it sounded like a number of years, possibly. Could you tell us a little bit about that? How did you come to do that? I mean, that sounds like you talked about being, an adventurer when you're a kid, like Indiana Jones or something. That sounds to me like an Indiana Jones experience.
It was, yeah. And by the way, Observer, we'll come back to your question at the end because I suppose Sicily would form the natural kind of conclusion to this. But yeah, for about 7 years, I think it was. It's a little bit hazy about when I officially started, as it often is in Italy. But yes, I worked as a translator for the archaeological site of Pompeii. And that was indeed an adventure because the way that started was because I attended lectures at the British School in Rome, which a lot of people, especially Italians, mistakenly assume is a language school in Rome, but it's not. It's actually our kind of campus on the ground in Rome, which historically where academics go to study ancient Rome. And many British-led excavations are kind of launched from there, if you will. But every Wednesday, I don't know if they still do, but every Wednesday they did public lectures. And 1 week back in, I guess this was 2014, Pompeii, there was because those who remember those years might remember that Pompeii was notorious for corruption and mismanagement for a long time. In the 90s, the early 2000s especially, it was disastrous. I mean, there were collapses at the site, and the absolute nadir was, I think it was 2010-ish, and I forget the exact year, but the Scola Armatura, which was the gladiator school at Pompeii, collapsed due to a buildup of water, but which would not have happened had the building been maintained properly. And it was actually so bad, I was told, that the corruption was so bad that Pompeii, one of the most visited tourist sites, archaeological sites in the world, couldn't even pay its own water bill. And excavation, of course, couldn't happen. And it became this tragic story of Italy's. It became this emblematic case of Italy's corruption. And then there was this huge project, 120 million euro investment. Pompeii had a new director, Massimo Orsana, and he was giving this lecture at the British School. So I attended that, and because I was, into ancient history and this kind of thing, I was well aware of the state that Pompeii was in. So I was I was going into that expecting to despise everything about this. And as I say, especially if you're in archaeology history, that site made you angry because of what was going on there. But he gave an extraordinary presentation, and he was saying, you can tell when someone's heart is actually in something, whether it's a calling or a job. And for him, it was certainly a calling. And so I had a positive impression. Then afterwards, what usually happens after those talks, the director of the school invites those who are still there to his kind of apartments there for a drink and a chat, basically. So I went, and there were about 25 of us, I think, including this guy, Massimo Zana, and we sat down and I had a chat with him. And as fortune would have it, he had this great passion for Yorkshire in England and sort of literature, English literature. So, and also he was from Matera in Basilicata, where a couple of weeks earlier I'd just been. So the ice was easy to break, so to speak. And we were talking, and then he, at a certain point, said, I can't remember if he actually mentioned it in that meeting or not, but for whatever reason, a few weeks later, I got an email from the administration of Pompeii saying that Director Orsana has recommended you for this position, which was an English translator. Because I'd said as well, it probably came up in the conversation, I can't remember, but one thing that always triggers me was the management of Italian cultural sites, about firstly the poor quality of the translations, especially on the information boards, this kind of thing, and also the barrier of assumed knowledge being ridiculously high. So most people have no idea what's actually going on there. Maybe this came out in the conversation, but obviously it was to my benefit. But it was quite enlightened of him to do that, because having someone who's actually a proper translator is a thing, but somebody who is actually knows the history of the site as well. Like, just to give you an example, a common mistake in many Italian sites is to translate the names of ancient Romans, to not translate the names of ancient Romans, because in Italian, so Maximus, for example, the name in Italian is Massimo. So even in Italian, in the English translation, they'll write the Emperor Massimo, which is awful in English, but they won't know that in English we use the Latin. Just things like that. So I was employed as Pompeii's English translator, and I was occupied with all kinds of stuff, from panels to exhibitions to particularly the press releases. And because under that period, the administration of the site was actually good, they actually were able to start excavating again. And so that it became something of a golden era at Pompeii. And so every so often, people might have seen it in the news in the last 10 years, every so often there's a new discovery at Pompeii. So I was often involved in translating the press releases for the World's Press for that. So it was a very exciting time. The big things were found. Amazing frescoes emerged, the mosaics. There was an estate outside the site where horse skeletons were found, the slaves' quarters. Incredible stuff. So that was, and because of its location in Campania, as a result, I would often go down to Naples and that area of Italy as well. I worked remotely from Rome itself, but I'd often go down to Naples, and also through the site, I also worked for a time for Electa, which is Italy's major publisher of historical works. So they often manage and curate exhibitions as well. So there's several exhibitions that I translated the material from. One was really spectacular. Was about Picasso, who most people might not know. Picasso actually lived in Naples for a while, and he painted as an operatic stage curtain that he painted, which depicts Pompeii and Vesuvius. And it had never before left Spain, and it was brought to Naples, to the Royal Palace of Capodimonte up on the hill above Naples. So, invited to the inauguration of that, and that was amazing. Wow. So all kinds of weird and wacky things came out of that.
Sounds like
so
it.
It was, yeah.
Pompeii is I can't think of another site in the world today that is as exciting for me, at least, as just like this active archaeology. I mean, like you said, they are continually uncovering this town and finding more and more gems, perfectly preserved, almost, from 2,000 years ago. I saw a special recently about it was some sort of real posh chariot that was found. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It was almost like a Cadillac of chariots. Really, really interesting stuff. Which reminds me, another exciting archaeology site that's active is Vindolanda in Northumbria, close to Hadrian's Wall. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I was there.
Tablets.
Yes, yeah. They were like little, were they copper or something like that? That the was it the Legionnaire's wife wrote, like letters to friends, inviting them to her birthday party and things like this, and everything just kind of got buried in the clay as they continually built the fort up as it rotted, and so all these things, leather, shovels, toilet seats, all kinds of things are preserved there, and it's a beautiful, beautiful museum. And they take application for volunteer helpers at the site. So that is on my bucket list. I almost tried. Yeah, I almost tried for the lottery this year with my brother, but I think because we were going to Africa, this is actually last year. We weren't going to do it this year, but hopefully sometime in the next decade, maybe I'll make it up there. But
definitely,
incredible stuff is out there.
For those who are wondering, I mean, Vindolanda, which is on Fort on Hadrian's Wall, is famous because of the unique conditions of the soil, which allowed preservation, especially of things made of wood. And it was the practice when sending letters in those days that you would have basically two wooden tablets which closed together to seal it, but within was a layer of wax, and they would scratch the letter into the wax. It wasn't written on paper. As a result, if the thing is preserved, the wood is preserved, then so is the wax. And so as a result, this plethora of letters that were written by ordinary Roman soldiers to their families has survived there, where they've been lost everywhere else. And, as you say, very, very everyday things. There are stuff. There's one legionary, for example, who's thanking his wife for sending him warm clothing. There's even the weekly rota of duties in the fort. There's one, for example, I think there's a famous one of a soldier complaining about the weather on the British frontier. There's one who famously complains that the locals are constantly drunk. This kind of thing. And there's an it's not a tablet. I think it's a tombstone, but another indication of the scale of Rome. There's actually a soldier who was born in Palmyra, which is in Syria, who was serving on Hadrian's Wall. So he crossed basically the entire known world to serve as a soldier there. So it's an extraordinary place.
Definitely.
Yeah, but exciting as well, as you say, because it's active. And this is the real kind of win of that era at Pompeii as well, is that it went from being this depressing story of constant loss to gain, to discovery. It became an active site. And actually, if you just bring up the image I shared on this, the thing there, to the extent that this is a photo I took from the southern wall of Pompeii a few years ago. They're actually replanting the vines which were cultivated there. And you can actually buy the wine, the Pompeii wine that's being produced as a result.
Nice.
So, it's just incredibly wholesome how that turned around. He, by the way, Massimo Zana, at the end of his tenure, he was appointed Director General of all Italian museums. So he's now a big gun in Italy itself, with competences all over the country. So it's a lot of good. Contrary to other things happening in Italy in terms of its culture, there's a lot
Step
of
in the
really
right
encouraging
direction.
stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, great. That's brilliant. Liberty Mom has a question here. She says, "Are you a teacher in Australia as well, and do you have plans to go back to Italy?"
I still teach some Italian students remotely because I like to keep that connection going. I'm not actually, well, not in a literal professional sense, a teacher here. I work as an educational consultant for a company in America. I also work for a town planning company here as well. I also produce historical reports for various Australian councils as well, which is a nice way to kind of blend skills, you might say. But in terms of Italy, do I plan to go back? Yeah, indeed I do. In fact, I will be going back in just over a month's time because those of us who follow Invictus might know we are doing a retreat in Rome in the end of June. If you're interested, let us know by all means. So that's going to be very exciting, especially given the gravity of the events which are going on in Rome right now.
Absolutely.
And let us not forget that apart from the conclave and everything, this year 2025 is also a jubilee year. In the church. Already it was going to be a big deal. So that's my immediate answer. But yes, I would like to eventually reach a situation where I can divide time at least between Italy and this part of the world, because I was born in England, I went to school in England, I went to university in England, but as far as I'm concerned, my formative years were spent in Italy, because those are the years which formed me in the proper sense of the word. Because by the way, kind of meshing two threads here, by knowing Pompeii, because I translated almost everything that went through the site for almost a decade, so I learned a lot about the site. And also what was really interesting is the story of how it was first rediscovered under the Bourbons in the 18th century, and the Academy of Herculaneum that was founded, and how it contributed to the birth of the neoclassical world. I became really, and also from the people I was working with, who were all Neapolitans mostly, I really got to discover that part of Italy. I mean, Naples is a classic example of a city which gets a lot of flack, not without reason, but gets a lot of flack, especially from visitors, and is kind of dismissed. But Naples, it's kind of tying back to another question, your favorite part of Italy, because I've been asked the question many times, and I think I like to interpret that question as, I think a more helpful way to interpret the question is, if there was one thing in Italy which, if you removed, Italy would no longer be Italy. Is there one thing in Italy which Italy needs to be Italy? I would say Naples. And the reason why is because everything that makes Italy so memorable and so distinct is found on extravagant display in Naples. The cuisine is out of this world. The culture is very, very boisterous. It's very in your face. It's one of the few cities where the historic center itself is still inhabited by authentic Neapolitans of all classes. It's one of the few places in the world where you can find a prince and a pauper living next door to each other, and they're both friends. So it's still a very authentic culture. They're very proud of their city as well. It has everything that makes Italy wholesome, and also everything negative as well. The most wonderful people in the world, and Neapolitans are some of the worst. You've got people who became literal saints. There's an army of saints who are from Naples. You've also got people who went into the Camorra and organized crime, rather like Sicily. But then when you learn about what happens to the south of Italy, especially in the late 19th century and beyond, a lot of the negative stuff, you realize, well, is unfortunately an inevitable consequence of tremendous wrong that was done to the Neapolitans and the Sicilians from unification onwards. So, I do feel this great admiration for what they've done, what they've been able to do, and this sense of community that's very strong in the Italian South. But, I do sympathize immensely with their plight. I'm not saying it's not their fault at all. Obviously, there are authentic indigenous issues. but there is so much of it which was forced upon them by others. The mafia is, well, the mafia getting to the state that it was is a prime example of this. So
I've heard stories, of how the mafia has just totally, leached the money, out of the community and done all sorts of horrible things with, whether it was even like burying nuclear waste or some sort of ridiculous thing that was like poisoning the people, but the mafia was making money off of it.
I mean, what I always say, the mafia, organized crime thrives where the state fails.
Yeah.
And the state failed the Italian South so spectacularly after 1860 that the mafia rose up as a rival state, quite simply, with tragic consequences. But at the same time, I tell people, if you could click your fingers and eliminate the mafia, some forms of evil will be eliminated, but it wouldn't solve the problem because the conditions for them to thrive are the failures of the Italian state itself. So it's more complicated than it's generally believed, and especially in Sicily. I mean, in the COVID pandemic, for example, remember Italy had very little to no welfare. Many people were, threw themselves upon the mafia as big. Put it like this: if you need a loan, you're not going to get it from the banks, but or if you do, there's this horrific process which will take months and months and months, or you've got this guy who can give you the money right now. And this, on top of the fact that there's over a century of horrific treatment by the state itself and its legendary corruption in Rome, the state itself doesn't have legitimacy. People, people operate on reality rather than ideals. It's it's tragic what happened, but understandable once you actually immerse yourself in the culture there.
Sure. Kathy says, really fascinating information and great guest. And I completely agree. This is gold you're sharing with us tonight, James. Really appreciate this. One thing I'll say, you had mentioned that Naples gets a lot of flack from tourists. And I had an experience. I was only in Naples for a day. So obviously I can't judge the city, but we had been to Florence. When we were in Florence, we had just the best of time. The weather was great. We rode e-bikes in the countryside, and the poppies were in bloom, and we just had the most fantastic experience. We go to Naples, and we were kind of wandering around, and I don't know. It's a big city, okay, and we were not.
Yes.
Maybe we weren't in the best area. But we kind of like walked down by the docks and kind of just wandering around, and we kind of felt a little uncomfortable at times. My wife did, especially.
Yeah.
And so we kind of had like this negative view of Naples. We go back to our next trip, and we take my in-laws and my youngest daughter, and we go to Florence. And we've been telling them, "Oh, Florence is so beautiful. You're going to love Florence." So they've got this grand picture in their mind. And we set them up for disappointment because we leave the train station. It's that night. I'm following Google on my phone. We're just walking to our place. And naturally, Google takes us through these alleyways. And you got the smells of the sewer coming up. And, the backsides of bars. And there's people coming out with trash. And, there are just some things that scared my in-laws and my daughter. And now, they're like, why would you like Florence? Florence is a scary place. Just like whatever your expectations are and whatever your experiences are, definitely can form your view of a place. But you definitely got to give it a second chance and just kind of go in with as little of expectations as possible. I think for a good experience.
Definitely. I mean, consider as well with a certain humility too, because Naples is the oldest continually inhabited city in Europe. It's older than Rome. So. They've learned a thing or two in that time. And the thing about the Italian South is that it has been, what makes it so rich as well is that it's been ruled by an extraordinary succession of cultures. There was the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, in the case of Sicily and parts of southern Italy, the Normans, the Spanish, and then briefly the Austrians and also the Italians. So, and each of them left their mark in a certain way. I mean, the cuisine of Sicily, for example, is very heavily influenced by the Arabs. So a lot of, consider, for example, we take for granted that sugar was introduced to the Western world through by the Arabs because Sicily was ruled as an Arab emirate for 200 and something years.
Hmm.
The consequences of that is that Sicily, the south, has by far the richest culture of desserts in Europe, I would actually argue. Everything from the
Wow.
cannolo siciliano, the cannoli, the famous cannoli. The idea of putting sugar in ricotta is a legacy of Arab rule. So, and likewise in the west of Sicily, pasta is not the staple dish; it's couscous, which
Oh,
again
really?
was brought over by the Aghlabids.
Huh.
But the island is thoroughly Catholic. But you've got that, in terms of the cuisine, for example, that hold on ice cream. Likewise, was brought by the Arabs, and ice cream is particularly associated with the south. So there's that richness to it, which makes it very different to the north of Italy. There's all these little, as I say, the culture is just phenomenally rich and lived.
Yeah.
Naples. In Naples, you can see old men with youths just playing cards on the street all over the place, no matter how grotty the surroundings. There's a lot of there's no getting around it. But this is the kind of thing about Naples. You can turn a street and it can be stunning in the sense you'll find something which you would never have imagined was possible on this earth. Then you turn the other direction, you could think, whoops, I feel like I will be stabbed if I take a single step in this direction. So which obviously I'm not saying it's good that happens, but it kind of makes the city, it's not a city that pretends to be something other than it is, but as a result, it's just so interesting because the full spectrum of human emotion is on display.
Right. Yeah.
In a way where it's kind of suppressed elsewhere.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, you just mentioned the north of Italy. Can I ask you? Can you take us to the north of Italy and talk about Venice a little bit? Because you posted something that really intrigued me maybe a month ago or so. You said you were concerned about staying in Venice. I don't know if it was for a month or more, but you said you were worried it might lose some of its magic, but it was actually quite the opposite. Are you able to tell us a bit about this? Because now, again, I've only been to Venice for a couple days, but I've got to say, like, it ranks at like the top of the places I've ever been on Earth. It seems so different and magical and isolated, and I loved how it was just like a rat maze of little alleyways, and you kind of never know what you're going to turn and see. I would just wander around, don't look at your phone, just wander the alleyways, and you come to a dead end and you got to turn around and go back. And at nighttime, my wife and daughter and in-laws, they were tired. They went to the hotel. All the tourists had left. We were staying on the island, and I was like, man, I can't go to bed. I'm going to go see the city. So I just walked around for a couple hours just by myself. Nobody was out. It was fantastic, and I stumbled on the spiral staircase, the snail, whatever it's called, the Scala.
Scala Contarini del Bovolo is the name. Yeah.
Yes. That was such a sight at nighttime. Not a soul around, and it was beautiful.
I could wax lyrical about this for many hours, but it's one of the most wonderful memories and also painful as well, because I have never actually recovered psychologically from leaving Venice, but which comes back to what you said, is that the results of the pandemic opened many doors of possibilities which might not have been possible otherwise. I mean, me living in Sicily for 6 months, for example, would not have happened if the pandemic hadn't happened. I would have stayed in Rome. But after that period in 2021, when we came back, we lived in Venice for a while. I always knew it was kind of a pipe dream, to live in Venice one day. But I was seized by this preoccupation, as you say, that I thought, I'm praying that it doesn't happen, that the enchantment is not broken by living there, which could easily happen. It often does. But I tell you, it was the exact opposite. Now, just to show people this, again, I'm not sure how possible this would have been outside of pandemic circumstances. This was 2021. We got ourselves an apartment at a good price, by the way. I don't want people to go over this thinking that, as I say, this was uniquely privileged in terms of money or anything. It wasn't at all. It was very affordable. I'll just bring up the... how do I get there? No, actually, it'll be easier if I do this. I'm just so people know where it is. I think it would be worth pointing this out. I have to go in a different map though, because it doesn't let me use the satellite for some reason. So bear with me just 1 second. So we moved there it was just before my birthday. It was June 2021. So just the beginning of the summer. Right, here we go. I'm just going to share the screen. If this thing will... Right, okay. So bear with me. Sharing the screen. Not that one. That one. Okay, great. Okay, if you could just whip that on the stage.
Should be coming. Let's see. I have to remove this other one. Yeah, it's coming here. Here we go.
Oh yeah, okay. So here, of course, is Venice with the famous clasped hands shape of it. There's my little. There's my pin there. That's where I lived. So we had an apartment here in this area of Venice. Wow. It's called Canaleggio. We were just, as you can see, we were one canal away from the Grand Canal, and we lived there for about how long was it? About 4 months, I think it was. And one thing that really struck me in Venice is that it gets a lot of people say that it's inauthentic, that it's overrun with tourists. It certainly is overrun with tourists, or at least St. Mark's is overrun with tourists during the day in all ordinary circumstances, but the rest of Venice most certainly is not. That's the thing, that 90% of visitors to Venice don't go beyond St. Mark's Square. So if you're just going to, if all you've seen of Venice is, the Rialto Bridge, for example, or San Marco here, then I can understand why you'd have that impression. And certainly many of the streets immediately around it are very, very touristy. But the rest of Venice is not at all, especially this area, and kind of down here as well, and especially the island of Giudecca as well. What really struck me as well were two things. Number one, you don't notice it when you're going there as a tourist first time, but there are so many little parks in Venice. And if you look at the map, you actually see quite a lot of green splashes of greenery around. And which comes into the other point is that everybody in Venice who lives there lives in, I imagine it's not at all different to how most people lived until the 19th century. A lot of people live in courtyards around a well.
Yeah.
And so you obviously, because your windows are only a few meters apart at most, everybody in the same courtyard knows each other. People share stuff all the time because that's the culture. If you've got children, they share toys and they're playing in the courtyard and everyone can see them. It's very strong. It's a very strong community, and most of these have their own little park nearby. So if you live there, you can actually, unlike in other parts of the world, you can actually get to know people quite quickly, unless you're completely, completely antisocial. But even if you are, because you have the curious situation of the rubbish in Venice. You can't just there's no bidone or big bins where you can throw your stuff away. What happens is that every morning, the doorbell rings, and the guy comes to collect your rubbish because of the strict laws in Venice about rubbish disposal. You have two solutions. Number one, you physically hand it over to the guy in the morning, or you have to suspend it on a rope outside your window. And there is a strategy to that, because if it's too high up, then the bin man obviously can't reach it. If it's too low, then the birds will have it and you'll attract rats. So we just gave it to the guy in the morning, and it was usually about 8:30, I think, in the morning they came around, and they'd always have a little bit of a chat. So that really struck me in Venice, this incredibly strong sense of local community. Yes, the indigenous population of Venice is shrinking, but there is something still very, very wholesome about the Venetians who are left. And bear in mind as well that in Venice, there is basically something happening every couple of weeks. There is, there's a religious festival, a festival of San Rocco for something like this, the religious festivals, the Redentore. Then you've got the big stuff like the oh my goodness, the word has escaped my mind embarrassingly. What is it?
Carnival?
Carnival, absolutely. Yep. Around Easter time. The Biennale is what I was aiming for. So you got the Biennale, the Venice Film Fest, the Biennale of Art, of Architecture. There's one of dance. There's another. Then you've got this film festival, which is in every September when all of the glamour in the world descends upon Venice. So they've struck a really interesting balance between there's a lot of very elegant and close, wholesome stuff like these religious connections, but also this very kind of glamorous connection to the Biennale. They've found a way of making the city kind of active, but without being totally surrendered to tourism as well. As I say, in San Marco, in that area, yes, for sure, it's very touristy, but the rest of Venice is not. So that really hit me. So, you see the rest of the city in a different light as a result. And, we were there for many months. And, we were also kind of fortunate that it was still in COVID. So there were very few international visitors there in July and August. Wow. But just to show you as well, I've just added if you could just show that slide, which is called Maddalena.
Sure.
So this is a photo out of my window.
Wow.
Where I was staying, and before anyone says it, I have not touched the colours of that photo at all. That was
fantastic.
That was a summer storm one day in August. That's the thing in Venice. You get these extraordinary skies, and then you see these paintings of the 18th century, these pinks and yellow skies, and you think, well, actually, there's sometimes the sky is actually like that. So out of our apartment, I can't describe this really in words. We were there, as I say, we were there for many months. The only thing we heard outside the window was the gentle lapping of the canal water, and then every 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something, a gondola would pass. And then at the end of all this, when we returned to Rome, my goodness, the traumatic effect of emerging in Rome Termini station, because you forget what cars sound like. You forget what the sound of the car engine sounds like, and it was so overwhelming and deafening. Just hearing this, Vespers everywhere and these cars. I emerged into the station thinking this was a horrible mistake leaving Venice. But so it's it's another world, and the magic is only enhanced. And we had our pass for all the boats and stuff, so we'd hop on a boat whenever we wanted. Because you can't travel. There's no taxis or bus service there. It's all underwater, and you can travel across the whole Venetian lagoon on the same ticket as well. So there are so many other islands in the Venetian lagoon. I mean, there's Murano, Burano, Torcello, and then further afield you've got some isolated islands which just have a monastery or something on them. San Francesco del Deserto, for example. Extraordinary. I mean, one of them is an island near the Lido, which is where the film festival takes place. But between the Lido and, if you flip back to the map, I'll just show people. Sure. So that it's actually a real place. Yeah. So you got Venice proper itself, the Rialtine Islands, and then this is the Lido down here. But in this area, for example, San Lazzaro degli Armeni, which is an Armenian Mekhitarist monastery, which has been there for hundreds of years, and where Lord Byron lived for a time and learned Armenian. And you can go and visit it. The monks will take you around there, and it's incredible to think that you're only a few hundred meters away from where the red carpets and the glitz is of Hollywood and all that sort of stuff. And here you're in this you're not aware of any of that because you're on an island in the lagoon. It's just this bastion of peace and tranquility. And, next door to it is up here is San Servolo, was the site of where the old insane asylum was in the 19th century. It's an incredible place to visit. And then, you've got other places like, I think, San Spirito. Hang on, where is it? Maybe it's that one there, I think. Is it Poveglia? Is that one? Yeah, Poveglia, which is one of the most haunted places on planet Earth. Infamously, you're not allowed to go there. And do you know why? Because most of the island's land is human bone. And fishermen's nets constantly snag bone there because a lot of plague victims. It was one of the main burial sites of plague victims in the 17th century. And to top it all, there was an insane asylum where the man who ran it in the early 20th century was famously sadistic. And eventually the patients there revolted and threw him off the bell tower and murdered him. So his vengeful spirit is said to haunt the island. And there's, as I say, the public is not allowed to go there without special permission. And, there are stories of people who have gotten there and, have spent a night of absolute terror and have never been there ever again. I mean,
Jeez, that's incredible.
Just to tail end of that story, there was about 15 years ago, there was some Russian, I think, oligarch who wanted to turn it into a hotel. And they got the consent and everything, started work. 24 hours after works began, the workers fled the island and refused to ever set foot in it ever again.
Really?
And it never happened. This project was
Did
pulled.
Did they say why?
A lot of them refused to talk about it, but for whatever reason, it was the whole story was just suppressed in the news. Like, it's not happening anymore.
No kidding.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stories surrounding that island. As I say, it's usually on the list of the 10 most haunted places in the world. This kind of stuff. Yeah.
James, this is incredible. I think we could talk all night. I know your voice is probably going to give out at some point. I don't know if there's anything else that you definitely want to share before we wrap up. I do want to tell people, please, if you've got any questions as we're getting close to the end here, please share them. And if you're having issues with your questions coming through, you can always DM me or DM James, and we can read those for you. But we're really happy for everybody that's tuned in and asking questions. James, every time I hear you talk, I am so amazed. You have so many stories, incredible experiences, and just this wealth of knowledge that is just unbelievable. So people, if you're not following James at Western Exile, you really need to, and you need to tune into his streams with Evan Amato every Thursday. Invictus, he goes into great detail, all sorts of amazing historical things. So yeah, James, what would you like to continue sharing with us here?
I don't know if he's still in the room, so to speak, but I owe it absolutely to Observer of Culture to answer his question properly. I'm just trying to find the actual image, which I had on hand a second ago, but it's why can I not see it? It should be here somewhere. There we are. Okay, right. He asked about the Casa Professor in Palermo. Yeah, so I mentioned I lived in Sicily for about 6 months, and while I was in Palermo, I did the ultimate kind of history nerd experience in that I had this list in chronological order of the historical sites of Palermo, and I went through it in chronological order, starting from the ancient Phoenician burial ground, through the ancient sites, through Arab Palermo, Norman Palermo, right up to the 20th century. And so, the Baroque era under Spanish rule is a key part of that. So Casa Professor, which has become a popular, there was a phase on X about a year ago where, almost every other, post would be about this church. So it's it's a obviously very impressive church. From the outside is quite unassuming, but the interior, as you can see, is rather intricate. Now, this sense of this intarsia, this, where this is all inlaid precious stone.
Wow.
This is not painting. It was quite a Sicilian craft. So you can actually, in that view, you can actually see two great contributions of Sicily to the Baroque. So it's in intarsia stone, but also stucco. So using plaster to make sculptures, like my profile picture, which is over the door in the background there. So this is not the main nave. This is the side of Casa Professor in Palermo. So this is the thing about Sicily, and often Italy more generally, that exteriors are often very deceiving. A church can look very plain from the outside, or a building, but you step inside, you will be shocked. Which indeed was the spirit of the Baroque, to shock and surprise people. This was the main base of the Jesuit order in Sicily until the Bourbon kings expelled the order in the late 18th century. So, I just think actually
just incredible.
Just on that thread, so to speak. I mean, maybe one last thing is, I think just one last image. Just a second.
While you're hunting that image, James, I want to share.
Yep.
That has been my experience when I was in Rome. So many of the buildings look beautiful from the outside, but there's many that just look like normal buildings. And we got done at the forum, and our tour guide had mentioned about La Scala Santa, and then also I can't think of the full name of the church, but it's St. Peter in Chains, and they're very very close to each other. And St. Peter in Chains, it was very unassuming looking building. La Scala Santa, the building also, and we go into the building of the Church of St. Peter in Chains, and my goodness, it's beautiful inside, but there are, the purported chains of St. Peter, and right to your right, I had no idea this was there. And I had seen this sculpture since I was a little kid in art books. Michelangelo, Moses by Michelangelo, and he's got the horns from the Vulgate translation, right? And it's there at a Pope's burial, but I couldn't believe it. It was like everybody's just walking by outside, not even aware of the incredible treasures in this building. So yeah, it's just incredible. You could probably pop in any building in Rome and have similar experiences. It's just fascinating.
Exactly. That's it. I mean, getting lost in Italy is always a good strategy because you always find something which you never thought was possible on this earth. I mean, one thing I did want to show, actually, which is in Palermo as well. I mean, there's loads of more famous things in Palermo, which people have probably seen already. The Duomo, the Palace of the Normans, the Palatine Chapel, something which, I seriously doubt many people are aware of, which is extraordinary, not only for its architectural value, but for what it represents. I'm just... I think that's just loaded. However, just hang on because I'll show people on the map where it is first.
Okay.
So people have a sense of the scale. I think this is a nice kind of wholesome thing to end on here. If you can just share the map there. So, here's the city of Palermo, the Sicilian capital, which, by the way, is on this part of the coast here, northern coast.
Okay.
But by the way, I should add that Palermo exists and is the capital of Sicily because of the Arabs. In ancient times, Syracuse was always the capital, but then it was the Arabs who made it the capital of the island. So it's another legacy of their rule. But just to show you, so here's the historic center. This kind of area is the Palace of the Normans. Outside the walls, though, if we just go down here, you'll see this massive structure here. Which is called the Real Albergo dei Poveri, which literally means the Royal Hospice for the Poor. Now, this is a fairly extraordinary innovation which the Bourbon kings brought to the Italian South in the 18th century. There's actually a sister which is even bigger in Naples. I mean, I could just quickly show you that, just so you have an idea. It's actually the largest building in Naples. Has exactly the same function as that in Palermo, but just to give you an idea. Napoli. Right. There's Naples there. We want... It's just up here somewhere. There we go. No, that's the Archaeological Museum. There it is. You see this colossal structure here?
Oh, yeah.
If we drop the little man down there. That massive building.
Wow.
It is also the Real Albergo dei Poveri. Now, what this was the first example of basically welfare that existed in the Western world. And like in Sicily, if you bring up the photo there, 517, it's a photo I took inside the difference is the one in Naples was never finished, but the one in Palermo was. Now, what this was, as I say, was the first example of welfare in the Western world. And what it was King Charles III of Naples, who came to the throne in the 1730s, who took his Christian mission as king very, very seriously. He was preoccupied from the beginning with the poor, of which there were a great many in Naples. And his vision was to build a complex which could house all of the homeless of the city. But not only to do that, it wasn't just about, keeping them there. The idea was that while they were there, they could be educated and trained in certain professions. Now, this one is organized, so literally the men are on the left, the women are on the right, and each gets their own courtyard. And so we have all the accounts of this. We've got all, the financial accounts as well. The whole thing was paid for directly out of the king's purse, not the state treasury. And it covered food, accommodation, scholarships as well. So those who passed through the system and were particularly brilliant could get a scholarship to study at the university. With the idea being that it would, take the most unfortunate people of Naples and Palermo and transform them into citizens of the society.
Wow.
So it's and the whole thing was centered around the church in the middle as well. So it's really an example because there's this stereotype, especially in Italy, that the South was very oppressive and very absolutist, all this sort of stuff. But they had extraordinarily wholesome things like this as well. Tens of thousands of people went through this over the course of 150 years. And when Italy was unified by force in 1860, the projects were killed. And now, of course, you have homeless all over the place in Naples and Palermo. So
Right.
it's it really is an achievement of the South as well, which, as I say, is unknown even amongst many Italians, but especially amongst us as well. That we always say that the past was very oppressive and very unenlightened and all this sort of stuff. Well, not always, and
Right.
there's feats like this show that
or that kings are always tyrants and just hell bent on their own luxury and don't look after their population.
No, indeed, this says otherwise.
Right.
So it really is a very wholesome thing. And apart from that, the architecture of the complex is obviously stunning as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's
Wow.
one of the wholesome things I discovered in Sicily. So
Fantastic.
you learn a lot about not only the place you're around, but also it opens up a lot of questions and assumptions you have about our world and its past more generally too. So just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. That is fantastic, James. Well, we have certainly learned a lot this evening. I know I have. This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much. I hope you will grace us and grace myself with future with you. That'd be fantastic. Let me ask you for this evening, is there one thing you'd like to leave everyone with, something you want them to remember about tonight or just travel in general?
Well, when it comes to travel, there is the classic distinction between the traveler and the tourist. I think really the meaningful difference between is somebody who's visiting and somebody who's living there. I think, because part of the reason I did this as well is because, until the early 20th century, in the Western world particularly, one of the things that was considered absolutely fundamental to the education, specifically of a gentleman, was a journey to Italy. What was known as the Grand Tour. So between the 18th and early 20th centuries, unless you had been to Italy, there was a gap in your education. To physically go there and to experience what Italy was and what it is. And so part of what our travels was to do that for ourselves and see what would come out of it. And I firmly believe that Italy is the key to understanding what is the Western world really about. What are so-called Western. We can devote a whole other stream to what that is ultimately. But if you do spend time in Italy, if you do give it more than a superficial glance, your worlds will open up beyond belief. And I think as well, there is no finer place to challenge your assumptions, especially from somebody from Britain or America, the Anglo-Saxon world, because so much of it is so different to what we take for granted. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Italian culture is is flawless, but it has a lot that it can teach us and challenges about what we think is correct or worthwhile. But also to say that in terms of I did this enormous, I feel it was clearly the most important thing I've ever done in my life was that travel. But I really want to emphasize this was something that we did while working too. It wasn't about taking an impossible 3 years off work and doing this thing. We did it while working, so it is doable in the 21st century for somebody who is a worker. So especially in the post-COVID era when you can work remotely for many jobs as well, and it is so worth doing. it can't be overestimated how important it is to burst out of your bubble. And Italy will burst any bubble. So that is, I suppose, is what I would urge. And also when you do go, be open-minded. Places like Naples, places which are part of the poorer part of Italy, are often the most wholesome because they're the most different from what we're used to. And material poverty is different to spiritual poverty.
True, right.
Understanding the difference is key. And, the two parts of Italy can teach us the benefits of both. So, I suppose that's the thought I would leave people with. Italy is the key. Explore her while you can.
Fantastic. I'll add one thing to that. You had mentioned, you did this while working, you weren't inherently wealthy and had all these means. One thing I noticed when I would go on vacation or travels is people that had waited until they're very elderly to travel, and they're just struggling. They're struggling to get around these medieval places and up the stairs and all this. And I thought, I can't put this off till then. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. You know what I mean? So I'm going to try to do what I can while I'm still healthy and can get around. And
absolutely. Just to build on that, totally. I mean, in many ways, it is the great con of our society. The idea, work hard for 30, 40 years or something, and then when you retire, you can do whatever you want. And of course, it never happens. Partially because the age of retirement is now so high, but you get to your most infirm stage of life, and you just can't do what you always wanted to do. But there's no actual reason you can't do it when you're young, and you should. Absolutely, because it will determine how you see the rest of your life. And of course, at that point, you're out of time.
Absolutely. Well, James, Western Exile, thank you again. Thank you to everybody that tuned in, especially those that asked a question and dropped a comment. Observer of Culture, Kathy Shanklin, Liberty Mom, Mick Amius. I know we had a Liberty Mom. I already mentioned her. But yeah, appreciate you all. And I'm going to be off for a couple weeks. I'm going to be traveling, so we won't have a show immediately next week. But we've got some other great things in store. So I'll put some postings up soon about future guests. But for tonight, thanks for tuning in. James, thanks again. I appreciate you, my friend. And
very welcome. Thank you.
We'll talk later.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's listened.
Good night.